Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. If anyone had asked about the house at 33 Granger Road before that October, no one would have known what you were talking about. There was no house, no driveway, not even a mailbox. And yet, after the fog rolled in that Friday morning, something stood there, impossibly old, grotesquely detailed, and as if it had been watching the street for decades. The neighborhood kids swore it had always been there. Some even claimed they'd played hide and seek in its backyard, but the grown-ups, they didn't remember it at all. It was as if their memories had been scooped out and replaced with carefully curated blanks. Charlotte Avery noticed the house first. She was 10, wide-eyed and too curious for her own good. Her window faced the street, and she always kept it cracked open, even in the cold. She said the sound of the wind helped her sleep. That morning, though, she was woken not by wind, but by silence, so complete it pressed on her ears like deep water. That's when she saw it, the house. It stood where a patch of overgrown grass used to be. But now there were stone steps, a leaning iron gate, and a crooked chimney spewing out thin, black smoke. The roof dipped like it was sagging under a great weight, and every window was covered with heavy lace curtains that looked more like spider webs than fabric. Something about it made her stomach twist. She didn't say anything at breakfast. Her mother, Julia, was already in one of her foggy moods. Eyes unfocused, pouring coffee into her cereal instead of milk. Charlotte watched, but didn't correct her. She never did during the fog. She asked, though, "Mom, did a new house go up across the street?" Julia blinked slowly, spoon halfway to her lips. Then she laughed, hollow and automatic. "What? Of course not. That lot's always been empty. But there's something there now." "No, sweetheart. Just trees and weeds, like always." And she went back to eating her coffee, soaked cereal, eyes glazed over like she was sleepwalking through her life. Charlotte didn't bring it up again. But after school, she went over. The gate creaked when she pushed it open, louder than it had any right to be. She stepped onto the stone path, her breath catching in her throat. The grass around the house was dead, not yellow, but gray, like it had been drained of color, of life. The closer she got to the porch, the more the air changed. It was colder, thicker, as if every step was pulling her farther from the street behind her. She knocked. The door didn't open, but something moved in the upstairs window. A figure, thin, long-necked, not quite human, just for a second. Then it was gone. She turned and ran, didn't look back, not once. That night, she had the dream. It started the same as every dream Shed had since she was a little girl, running down a hallway, chased by something she couldn't see. But this time, the hallway ended at a door, the same one Shed knocked on earlier. When she opened it, there was nothing on the other side but her bedroom. Only, not quite. The bed was there, the posters, her backpack. But hanging from the ceiling fan was a shape. It was her, eyes wide, mouth stretched in a silent scream, arms swaying in the breeze of a wind that didn't exist. Charlotte woke up screaming. Julia didn't come in to check. In fact, she never mentioned the screaming at all. The next morning, Charlotte stayed home from school. She faked a stomachache, which wasn't hard. Her face was pale and her eyes had sunken slightly, dark rings beneath them. But Julia didn't even question it. She just nodded slowly and sat back down at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, her spoon circling an empty bowl. Charlotte spent the morning watching the house. It never moved. Nothing came in or out. But every time she blinked, she felt like something had shifted. The curtains twitched. A shadow changed shape. A face, no, a reflection, moved just out of sight. By noon, she couldn't take it anymore. She called her best friend Mia. Mia had always believed in ghosts. Loved them, actually. Read every book on them. Watched every show. She was the brave one, the one who volunteered to go into the attic first or check under the bed. When Charlotte told her about the house, Maya's voice crackled through the phone. What do you mean it wasn't there yesterday? I mean it wasn't there, Maya. No one even remembers it. Silence. Okay, Mia finally said. Let's go look. They met an hour later. The fog had started to roll back in, crawling over the ground like smoke from a dying fire. It curled around their shoes and left dew on their legs. Charlotte pointed. There. Maya frowned. That thing looks ancient. It wasn't there before. No one remembers it. Mia shivered. Let's just walk around it. We won't go in. They didn't need to go in. As they circled the house, they found something strange. Scratches on the foundation. Deep, like something with claws had tried to burrow through the stone. And the ground near the back of the house, it was soft. Like fresh, turned soil. Like a grave. That's when they heard the whisper. It didn't come from the house. It came from the trees behind them. Charlotte, she turned so fast she almost fell. No one was there. Then it came again. Softer. Charlotte, come home. Mia grabbed her arm. We're leaving. Now. They ran. All the way back to Charlotte's house, hearts pounding, lungs burning. They didn't talk about it. Not then. Not until the next morning, when Mia didn't show up to school. She never came home. Her parents called the police. Said she left for school and never arrived. They printed flyers, posted on social media, searched the woods. Nothing. Charlotte told them everything. About the house, the whispers, the shadows. But when the officers followed her to 33 Granger Road, there was nothing there. Just an empty lot. Like before. Not even dead grass. Her screams echoed down the street. By the end of the week, 3 more kids were missing. All from the same neighborhood. All last seen walking near Granger Road. The police presence grew, but so did the confusion. Adults began forgetting their addresses, calling their kids by the wrong names. One man swore up and down he'd never had a son, while standing beside his child's empty bedroom, and the fog never lifted. Charlotte stayed indoors, curtains shut, doors locked. She didn't sleep. Not anymore. Every time she blinked, she saw the house. Not standing. Not anymore. Buried. Crushed under the earth like it had never existed. But still watching. The whispers came through her walls now. One night, she pressed her ear to the floor and heard scratching. From beneath, she dug. Her fingers blood, nails broke, but she dug. And there, in the crawl space beneath her room, she found something. A wooden plank, stained dark. Carved with strange symbols that shimmered in the dark. It pulsed under her hand, warm like skin. When she touched it, she heard her name again, but not from outside. From within, she pulled. The board cracked, and a face looked up at her. Not human. Not alive. It whispered, "We've missed you, Charlotte." She screamed. But no one came, not even her mother, because Julia was gone too, and the house on Granger Road was growing. Now, there were 2, identical, standing side by side, casting twin shadows across the street. And only Charlotte could see them. Only Charlotte remembered what used to be there. Or what didn't. The others, they had already begun to forget. And the house, no houses, were hungry. The worst part, they knew her name. Charlotte didn't sleep after the second house appeared. She couldn't. Every time her eyelids fell, she saw them. Those 2 structures looming side by side like waiting graves, identical in every detail, even down to the way the lace curtains fluttered in windows that were always shut. They had grown out of the ground overnight like mushrooms after a rainstorm, but there was no life in them. No warmth. Just an ancient cold that pressed against her bones even from across the street. No one else saw them. Not really. If she asked, people would give her that same glazed look, as if they were searching for a memory that had been wiped clean. "There's nothing there, honey," they'd say. Their voices flat. Just some old lots. Always been that way. But their eyes twitched when they said it. Just for a moment. Like they knew something was wrong, but couldn't hold on to the thought long enough to feel afraid. Charlotte watched the twins from her window. Morning. Night didn't matter. The fog didn't clear anymore. It moved slowly around the houses like it was circling prey. The shadows on the walls didn't follow the sun. They shifted on their own, stretching too long or too short, flickering when nothing moved. Sometimes, the chimneys breathed out smoke that stank like burning hair, and sometimes she swore she could hear something calling from inside. Not voices, not words, just sound. Wet, gurgling sounds that bubbled in her gut and made her want to throw up. She wasn't eating much. Not since Julia disappeared. It had been subtle. One day her mom was there, half zoned out at the kitchen table, stirring nothing in a cold cup of tea. The next, the chair was empty, her bed untouched, her clothes still hanging in the closet. No goodbye, no note, no sign of struggle. Just absence. Carved into every room like a ghost had reached through the walls and pulled her out of existence. Charlotte tried to tell someone. She went to the police station, with shaking hands and dark circles under her eyes. Told them about her mother vanishing, about the houses, about the kids who went missing. They smiled, nodded politely, said, "You live with your aunt now, right?" Charlotte blinked. "No. I live with your Aunt Marion from Hollow Creek. You've been with her since your mom passed. Don't you remember?" My mother didn't, but they were already walking away, talking to each other like she wasn't there. She went home alone. Only it wasn't home anymore. Everything inside was slightly wrong. Her bedroom furniture was too clean. The wallpaper was different. Her drawings, ones she remembered making in second grade, were missing from the fridge. In their place was a single photo, framed in silver, showing her standing beside a woman she didn't recognize. Marion. It was written on the back in a shaky scrawl that wasn't hers. Charlotte ran to the bathroom, locked the door, sat on the floor, arms wrapped around her knees, and tried to slow her breathing. She had to remember. She had to hold on to what was real. Her mother, the empty lot, the first house. Mia, the whispers, the scratches under the floorboards. Her mind felt heavy, like something was pushing down on it, trying to press her memories into mud. But she clung to them anyway, even as the shadows under the door stretched toward her toes. She couldn't stay there. Not in that house. Not in this town. But where could she go? Everyone was changing, forgetting, being erased. The next morning, she made a decision. She would go back to the twins. Not just watch from her window. She'd go in, find out what was inside, find out what had taken her mother, what had taken Mia, what had taken everything. She packed a flashlight, a pocket knife, a bottle of water, and one of Julia's scarves, just to remember, just in case. She waited until twilight. When the fog was thickest and the streets were empty, when the world held its breath, then she stepped outside. Her footsteps were muffled by the mist. The trees along the sidewalk bent slightly, their leaves curling inward, as if recoiling from her. The twins loomed ahead, their roofs bent like broken crowns. A chill settled around her shoulders, the air thick and sour. She reached the gate. It opened without a sound this time. She chose the house on the left. Somehow, it felt more awake. The door didn't creak. It just opened, like it had been waiting for her. Inside, the darkness wasn't empty. It was full, heavy, like walking into a room submerged in ink. Her flashlight barely cut through it. The beam flickered with every step, and the walls, they weren't walls. Not really. They breathed. Slow and rhythmic, the wallpaper pulsed like veins beneath translucent skin. The hallway stretched longer than it should. She took 10 steps, then 20, then 100. Doors lined the corridor, some open, some closed, some without knobs, some with eyes staring back at her through tiny cracks. She didn't stop, not until she heard it. A voice, clear, familiar. "Charlotte," she froze. It was Mia. "Help me," the voice whispered. She ran toward it, down a narrow set of stairs that hadn't been there before, into a room that hummed with low vibrations like a throat preparing to scream. Mia was there, huddled in the corner. But her eyes, they weren't Maya's. They were black, glossy hollow, and her smile was too wide. "Charlotte," she said again, "you finally came home." Charlotte stepped back. "You're not her." Mia, whatever were her face, crawled forward, her joints cracked, spine bending at odd angles. She didn't want to stay. None of them do. But it's better here. No pain, no fear, just the house, just us. "I want my mom," Charlotte said, voice trembling. "She's here, too," said Mia. "But she doesn't remember her name anymore." Charlotte bolted. She ran back up the stairs, through the hallway that now pulsed like a throat about to swallow, out the door that screamed as it opened. The fog outside had turned black, and across the street the second house had opened its door. A figure stood inside. Julia. Hair falling in tangled curls, eyes empty, mouth open in a silent, endless scream. Charlotte collapsed onto the grass, choking on sobs, because now she knew. The houses weren't buildings. They were mouths, and they were still hungry. But worst of all, they were starting to remember her, too. Charlotte didn't remember running back to the house. She only knew she'd made it when she found herself curled beneath her bed, her knees to her chest, her heart slamming like a fist against her ribs. Her clothes were damp from the black fog. Her fingers were scraped raw from clawing at the street when she slipped on something. Maybe wet grass, maybe bone. She didn't look. She couldn't. But the house, her house, if it still was, didn't feel any safer now. It felt different. Slightly off, like a set painted for a play, where the walls looked solid until you leaned on them and they bent. The ceiling fan spun, though no windows were open. The light bulb above her bed flickered, and each time it did, the shadows beneath the door moved like something pacing just outside. She tried to hold on to her breath, her sanity, her name. She wasn't sure how much longer either would last. At some point, she must have passed out, because she woke to the sound of whispering. Not outside, inside the room. She sat up fast, the blanket falling from her shoulders. The light had burned out, leaving her room lit only by the grayish glow of fog pressing against the windows. But the voices were still there, children's voices, soft, familiar, not speaking any words she could understand, but layered with a kind of mournful harmony that vibrated just beneath her skin. She turned slowly. They were there, 3 of them, standing near her closet. One had no eyes. The sockets were hollow, weeping black liquid down his cheeks. One had no mouth, just torn flesh where lips should been, and yet somehow still whispered. The third had a rope around her neck. The mark of it burned deep into her skin, her feet hovering an inch above the ground. Charlotte didn't scream. She couldn't, because she knew them. They were the missing kids. Daniel Harper, Molly Simmons, Eric Tran, all vanished from the neighborhood in the last 2 weeks. But now here they were, or what was left of them. She clutched her blanket tighter. "What do you want?" The mouthless girl floated closer. Her fingers trembled as she pointed to the floorboards, then to Charlotte's hand. Charlotte looked down. Her fingers were stained with dirt again. The smell of earth filled her nose. "I didn't dig last night," she whispered. But she had. In her sleep maybe. Or maybe something had guided her. She knelt, slowly, and pressed her palm to the spot where Shed found the plank before. It was gone now. No symbols, no pulsing warmth. Just wood, smooth, cold, clean. The boy without eyes tilted his head. Then the floor creaked. A panel shifted, and rose. She stared at it, heart hammering, not wanting to see what lay beneath. But the children's whispers grew louder, more urgent, and her own curiosity, twisted, relentless, pushed her forward. She pulled the panel free. This time it wasn't a crawl space. It was a tunnel, a dark one, with the faintest glimmer of light far, far below. She looked at the children. They nodded. She went in. The tunnel walls were tight, pressing against her shoulders. The air stank of mold and something older, rotting wood, maybe, or meat. She moved slowly, sliding downward on her hands and knees, feeling every splinter and shift in the boards. The whispering continued behind her, following her like a current. When she looked back, the children hadn't moved. They were gone. The tunnel opened into a room, a wide, circular space lit by candles that dripped blood, red wax onto the dirt floor. The walls were lined with mirrors, but none reflected her face. Instead, each one showed a different scene, a memory, maybe. One showed Julia, crying and rocking in a chair that no longer existed. Another showed Mia, curled up in a dark room, her face blank, humming a lullaby she never liked. A third showed Charlotte, younger, much younger, standing at a park holding hands with a man she didn't recognize, both of them looking at something in the sky. She tore her gaze away. In the center of the room stood a table. Not wood, not metal. It looked alive. Its surface rippled gently, and veins pulsed just beneath the top. Resting on it was a book, old, leather-bound, but not leather she recognized. Its cover was stitched together from pieces that looked disturbingly like skin. She stepped forward. Her name was etched across the front. Not written, carved. She opened it. The pages writhed, not metaphorically, literally. They twisted and squirmed like worms trapped in paper. But the words, when they settled, were legible. They were her memories, all of them. Birthdays, tears, Julia's lullabies. The time she broke her arm climbing the old oak behind her school. The way Mia laughed at her own jokes. Written, listed, cataloged, and the last entry. Charlotte Avery consumed, to be remembered. She dropped the book. The ground trembled. From the mirrors came a sudden, unified voice. They forget, so we remember. They erase, so we rebuild, one piece at a time. She backed away, but the candles flared, and the door behind her closed. From the tunnel above, she heard a voice, Julia, singing, humming that same lullaby. Off key, slow, almost robotic. Charlotte turned, heart in her throat. There she was, standing at the edge of the tunnel entrance, but not quite right. Her face was smooth where eyes should be. Her mouth stretched across her cheeks like it had been pulled with fishing wire. Her arms hung too long, too thin, and her voice wasn't hers. It was the house's. Charlotte, it whispered in a dozen layered tones. Come now. You're the last, the final. Charlotte turned and ran toward the back wall of the room, past the pulsing table, ignoring the whispers, the screams, the clawing from behind the mirrors. She slammed her shoulder into the wall, over and over, until it cracked. Splinters tore her skin. Blood smeared the surface, but the wall broke, and she burst through. Into the other house, the twin. She recognized the hall, the doors, the stench. Only this one was worse. Every wall was covered in skin. Real, stretched, stitched skin. Faces pressed against it from within, screaming silently. Mouths open wide, hands clawing from the other side. The ceiling dripped, the floor writhed beneath her feet. She ran. Every door she passed opened, showing scenes she couldn't comprehend. A boy walking upside down on a ceiling, dragging his own spine behind him. A woman with no head brushing the hair of an empty chair. A group of children standing in a circle around a pulsing heart nailed to the floor, chanting a song in reverse. She screamed. She didn't even realize it at first. But she was screaming, and the house screamed back. Then a door opened that wasn't like the others. Inside stood herself, Charlotte, whole normal, unblinking, staring back. You're the memory. The other Charlotte said. The one who stayed too long. The one who remembered too much. Charlotte stepped forward. Who are you? And what comes after? And then she smiled. And it wasn't human. Charlotte turned and fled down the corridor, her own footsteps chasing her like echoes out of sync. She slammed through a final door and woke up in her bed. Sunlight poured through the window. Birds chirped. Julia was downstairs humming in the kitchen. Everything was normal. Her books were on the shelf. Her drawings back on the fridge. Maya texted her movie after school. The no fog, no twins, no tunnel. But on her arm where shed scraped the wall, the wound remained. 3 letters, still fresh, CAV, her initials, carved into her skin. She lifted her shirt, more letters, more cuts. TBR, to be remembered. The house wasn't gone. It had just let her out, because now it was inside her. Charlotte didn't go to school that day. The sunlight outside was too bright, too cheerful. Too wrong. It baked the houses in its golden light, and yet every shadow felt off, angled strangely, stretching in directions they shouldn't. Birds chirped louder than usual, as if overcompensating, and the people she passed outside, Mr. Ellison from 2 doors down, the mailman, even the twins who always biked past her porch, smiled too wide, eyes fixed just a moment too long, as if someone had told them how to behave, and they were trying desperately to remember the steps. She stayed inside. Every room was immaculate, cleaner than she'd ever seen it. Julia's usual clutter was gone. No open bills on the table, no half-finished coffee mugs, no muddy shoes by the back door. The fridge hummed quietly, full of labeled, organized containers, like someone had just moved in and wanted everything perfect. But none of the containers had her favorites. No orange soda. No leftover spaghetti. No marshmallow cereal. Charlotte opened the silverware drawer. Every spoon had her initials engraved on the handle. She ran to the bathroom and splashed water on her face, expecting the mirror to show someone else. But it was still her. Pale. Gaunt. Eyes wide and ringed with bruised exhaustion. She rolled up her sleeves again. The letters were still there. CAV and TBR. Scabbed now but real. Too real to be a dream. She pressed a nail into the edge of the scar to feel it. Pain flared. Sharp. Certain. The house had marked her. And now the world was pretending nothing happened. When her phone buzzed again, she nearly threw it. But it was Mia. Running late. Meet you at the arcade instead. She stared at the screen. Hands trembling. She hadn't seen Mia since she vanished. Since she'd seen her face stretched and smiling like a mask, whispering that Julia no longer remembered her name. And now she was inviting her out for air hockey. Charlotte typed, "Where have you been?" The dots popped up, paused, vanished. Then, "Lol, what do you mean? I was just at home. Did you forget again?" "You're the space cadet this time." Charlotte's blood turned to ice. "You remember the house?" she asked. Another pause. Then what house? She didn't answer. Instead, she opened the front door and stepped into the bright, wrong world. The arcade was downtown. A long walk, especially when your mind is trying to unravel everything it thinks it knows. The air shimmered with heat, but Charlotte felt cold. Too many people were on the sidewalks, walking in perfect rhythm, heads turning in sync. No one bumped into anyone. No one shouted. No one spoke. Just wide smiles and quiet nods. When she passed her old elementary school, she paused. There was a new mural on the brick wall near the playground. It hadn't been there yesterday. It showed children playing, at first glance, cheerful and ordinary. But if you looked closely, too closely, things unraveled. One girl had no face. A boy on the swing had black holes for eyes. A teacher watched from the window, her mouth too wide, teeth jagged like broken glass. And painted in the grass, half, hidden by the shadow of a tree, was the silhouette of a house. The same house. One of the twins. She ran the rest of the way to the arcade. The building stood just where she remembered, blinking neon lights flickering in the daylight. But even the lights looked nervous, twitching like they wanted to say something, but couldn't. Inside, everything buzzed with artificial life, games beeping, tokens clinking, voices rising in laughter. But none of it sounded real. The voices repeated the same laughs in perfect loops. The machines all showed the same high scores. Maya was by the claw machine. Smiling, too wide. Charlotte approached slowly. "Maya." Mia turned. Her eyes lit up with practiced joy.
"There you are!"
"I was starting to think you bailed on me." "You disappeared," Charlotte said. "For days. Everyone was looking." Mia laughed, cutting her off. "You always say that." "I think someone's been reading too many spooky stories again." She leaned in. "You okay, Char? You look like you haven't slept in a week." "I haven't," Charlotte whispered, "because you weren't here. You were in that house. You were the house. You said my mother didn't remember her name." Mia blinked once, twice. Her smile cracked just slightly, like dried clay. Then she said, "You should stop talking like that." "What?" "Shuh," Mia hissed, without moving her lips. "They're listening." Charlotte's breath caught. "Who?" she asked, but Maya had already turned, walking briskly toward the back hallway, past the prize counter, past the bathrooms, toward a door that was labeled EMP Loi ESOLY. Charlotte followed. Behind the door was a dark hallway. The lights flickered. The air buzzed. "Maya!" she called. But Maya was gone. And ahead of her, in the shadows, something stirred. The hallway stretched like the one in the twin houses. Doors on each side. All closed, all humming. And at the end of the hall was a mirror. Not glass. Not metal. Something else. It pulsed. As she stepped closer, it lit up, not from behind, but from within. And in it, she saw herself, wearing a different face, older, taller. Her eyes black as coals, her mouth stitched shut. The stitched face whispered without sound. Charlotte pressed her palm to the surface. The mirror burned cold, then shattered. The hallway vanished. She stood outside again, back on her street. Only now there were 3 houses. 3 crooked homes side by side, their windows twitching, chimneys oozing smoke that stank of burnt teeth. Her own house was gone. Erased, in its place the third had risen, an exact replica of the other 2. And she remembered. Julia, her lullaby. Maya's voice. The book with her name carved in it. The children whispering in her walls. She wasn't outside the house anymore. She was within it. The world was the house, and it was growing. She backed away, but every step she took, the street changed. The cracks in the sidewalk pulsed. The trees leaned inward. The sky above her rippled, seams showing where clouds had been stitched in place. People watched her now. Their eyes empty. Their smiles split too wide. And every one of them whispered as she passed, to be remembered. To be remembered. To be remembered. Her head throbbed. Her knees buckled. She fell. And as her vision blurred, she saw a shadow step into view. It was her, not a reflection, not a dream, but her. The version the house had promised. The final version. She knelt beside Charlotte's trembling body and whispered gently in her ear, "You can't run anymore. You've been remembered." And then the houses blinked, and the world went dark. Darkness didn't fall all at once. It soaked in slowly, like ink spilled across parchment. Charlotte was aware of its descent not through her eyes, but her skin. It crept across her limbs, beneath her fingernails, into the cracks behind her ears and down the arches of her feet. It was not the absence of light. It was a presence, thick, cold, and ancient. A living night, and it knew her name. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer on the street. She stood barefoot in a long hallway that stretched farther than she could see, its walls lined with door after door. All identical, all closed. The floor beneath her feet was warm and slick, like the surface of a living tongue. The air buzzed faintly with whispering, hundreds of voices murmuring in unison, too soft to make out, too close to ignore. Somewhere deep inside her, Charlotte understood this wasn't a place she had arrived at. This was a place she had been pulled into. A memory, but not hers. She took a step forward. The lights above her flickered to life, one by one, stretching ahead in a perfect line. Each bulb popped on with a wet crackle, and each time it did, the whispering grew louder, more urgent. Her head began to pound. Her arms felt weightless, and her mouth was dry, the taste of ash crawling across her tongue. A door creaked open ahead of her. Just one. It groaned slowly, revealing nothing but black beyond the frame. Charlotte stopped walking. Her instincts screamed to turn around, to run, to claw her way back to anything real. But there was no real left. There hadn't been since the moment the second house appeared. Maybe longer. Maybe since the first dream. Maybe since she was born. She stepped through. The room inside was not a room at all. It was a theater. An empty one, with rows of crimson seats coated in dust and cobwebs. The stage was bare, curtains drawn back, and at the center stood a chair. No spotlight. Just that one chair, old and wooden, sitting in the silence like it had been waiting for decades. A figure sat in it. Julia. But not the Julia she remembered. Her mother looked younger. Her hair darker, her skin without lines. She stared forward, unblinking, unmoving. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap, and her lips were pursed like she was mid-thought, caught forever in the middle of deciding something important. Charlotte moved closer. "Mom." No answer. She touched her mother's shoulder. Julia's head turned slowly, the joints cracking with each inch, her eyes rolling toward Charlotte like marbles. She blinked once, and when she spoke, her voice echoed across the theater. "You're late." Charlotte stumbled back. What is this place?" Julia rose from the chair. The stage beneath her feet rippled. "This is where we come to remember what we were never meant to know." Charlotte shook her head. "No, I want to leave. I don't want to remember. I want things back to normal." "There is no normal," Julia said, stepping off the stage. "There never was. The house chooses. The house records. And now that it's your turn, it needs something from you." Charlotte backed away. "What do you mean?" Her mother's face twisted. Grief, rage, hunger, all blooming at once. "I forgot who I was because I had to. Because I looked too long. But you wouldn't let go. You scratched at the walls. You dug at the roots. And now it's growing again." The theater's seats began to move, shifting like waves beneath a blood-colored sea. From between the cushions, hands emerged. Children's hands. Small, pale, grasping, the missing kids, dozens of them. They climbed silently, expressionless, and stood in the aisles facing her. Charlotte's breath came in sharp bursts. "I didn't mean to, you remembered," said a voice behind her. She turned. Mia, smiling, but not the smile she wore in life. This was wider, sadder, filled with a kind of tired cruelty. "You remembered all of us," Mia said, walking toward her. "Even when the town forgot. Even when the world reset, you carried us." "I was trying to help," Charlotte choked. "I didn't want you to disappear. And now you want either," Mia whispered. Charlotte turned to run, but there were more children behind her now, wall to wall, blocking every exit. Their eyes reflected candlelight that didn't exist. Their mouths moved without sound. Their skin shimmered like wet paper. "I'm not like you," Charlotte said, shaking her head violently. "I'm still real." "Not anymore," said Julia. "Not since you opened the floor." Charlotte's body locked. Her knees buckled. She hit the ground hard, her cheek scraping across the rippling wood. Something writhed beneath the floorboards, something with breath, with eyes, watching. Then, from the stage, the chair moved. It slid toward her on its own, inch by inch, legs squealing against the floor. The children closed in. Mia took her hand gently, like they were in second grade again, sneaking out of the classroom. "It's your turn now." Charlotte screamed. She was forced into the chair, her limbs refusing to obey her commands. The moment her back touched the wood, straps lashed out and bound her in place. The theater darkened. The stage lights pulsed red. A curtain dropped behind her with a heavy thud, and then came the noise. 1,000 voices at once, not words, memories, flooding her mind, pouring in like water into a sinking ship. Names, dates, screams, tears, the moment each child had been taken. The moment each adult had forgotten. The moment the house opened its mouth and devoured them all. Charlotte wept. Not from pain. From the unbearable weight of knowing, of being the last one to carry the truth. When the lights finally went out, Charlotte was left shaking. Alone, or so she thought. A whisper snaked into her ear. "Blow dry. Now it's your house, Charlotte." She blinked and awoke. In bed, her room again. Morning sunlight, birds chirping. For a moment, she believed, desperately, that it had been a dream, until she saw the wallpaper. It wasn't the same. The pattern was unfamiliar, old-fashioned. She sat up slowly. The framed photos on the wall were different. Her drawings were gone again. The smell in the air was damp, musty, like a cellar left closed for decades. Then she looked out the window and saw her street. Empty. No people, no cars. Just 3 identical houses across the road, and a 4th, rising, shingled in black slate, its front door already open, waiting. Charlotte's hands trembled as she touched her wrist. New marks had appeared in her skin. XAV, owner, she whispered her own name aloud. No one answered, because no one remembered her anymore. And now, she was part of the house. Charlotte didn't leave the bed for hours. She sat there in silence, knees drawn up to her chest, her fingertips tracing the letters carved into her skin, as though they were braille meant to tell her the rules of this new world. The light filtering through her window wasn't morning light. It was too still, too staged, like a spotlight meant to mimic day for an audience that wasn't paying attention. Her breath clouded in the air, though the thermostat read 72. There were no outside sounds. No cars, no wind, no people. Just the soft creak of the house settling, or breathing, or listening. She stared out the window again. Now there were 4. The newest house was different. Taller. Its roof peaked like a witch's hat. The windows were blacked out completely. The kind of black that didn't reflect anything. The door stood open, as if an invitation, or expectation. Charlotte knew the 4th house hadn't been built. It had grown, and it hadn't finished. She stood at last, legs trembling, and made her way down the stairs. The hallway was longer than she remembered. The pictures on the walls were now photos of people she didn't recognize. Strangers frozen in blurry frames. Some had faces scratched out. Others wore old-timey clothes, stiff and proper, with smiles like they'd been stapled onto their skulls. Julia's coat wasn't hanging by the door. Her shoes were gone. Even the smell of her, the faint citrusy shampoo, was absent. This house, though it looked like hers, had shed every trace of the life she once knew. The living room TV was on, static, but every few seconds the snow would clear for a flicker, revealing a scene. A girl in a red hoodie walking down a hallway, a woman staring out a window as smoke rolled in, a house door opening, slowly, like it weighed 100 pounds. Then back to static. Then again, another flicker. Charlotte, standing in front of the house, her mouth moving in slow motion, eyes wide with panic. It was watching her, or worse, recording her. She turned it off, or tried to. The screen refused to go black. The power button didn't respond, so she unplugged it, yanking the cord with shaking fingers. The screen stayed on. That was when the doorbell rang. Charlotte froze. No one had rung that bell in days. Maybe longer. Not since Julia disappeared. Not since reality started peeling back like old wallpaper. She crept toward the door, looked through the peephole. Nothing. Just the fog. And then a knock. Harder. Slower. 1, 2, 3. She didn't answer. Couldn't. But something was slipping under the door now. A piece of paper. Folded 3 times. She snatched it up before she had time to think better. It read, "We see you, Charlotte Avery. Come before the 4th door closes. Or stay and become the 5th." She read it again. 5th. There was no 5th house. Unless she didn't move fast enough. She grabbed a jacket, though it didn't matter. It wouldn't protect her. She left her shoes behind. The ground outside felt wrong anyway, like stepping on skin. She didn't want to feel it through anything but her bare soles. At least then, she wouldn't lie to herself. Fog coiled around her ankles like it knew her scent. As she approached the 4th house, the wind picked up. Not natural wind, but a slow sucking breeze, as if the house were breathing in. The closer she got, the more the world behind her faded. When she turned back, her own house looked farther than it should have been, shrouded in mist, tilted at an angle that didn't make sense. The 4th house's door stood open. Inside it was dark, but not empty. There were stairs, just stairs, leading down. No walls, no furniture. Just that gaping descent into a throat made of wood and stone. Charlotte took the first step, and then another. With each footfall, the darkness changed color. From black to a deep red, to something like rusted copper, then to gray. The air thickened. The temperature dropped. She was going underground, but not into earth, into something between. The stairs ended in a room shaped like a cube. No doors, no windows. Just 4 walls, a ceiling, and a floor, all of them covered in carvings. Names. Thousands of names, etched into every inch of the surface. First names. Last names, initials, dates. Some had been scratched out. Some had been crossed with an X. but all were arranged in columns, neat and deliberate. In the center of the floor was a symbol. It pulsed faintly, a heart, like rhythm. The moment she stepped toward it, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned fast. A girl stood in the stairwell, taller than Charlotte, familiar in a way that made her stomach twist. It was herself, older, pale, wearing clothes she didn't own, smiling. "You made it," the other Charlotte said. "What is this?" the real Charlotte asked. "A waiting room," the other answered. "You're here because they chose you, because you remembered too much." "I don't want this." "You never had a choice." Charlotte stepped back, but the walls had closed in. Now there were doors where there had been names. 4 of them, each one with a handle shaped like a bone. The other Charlotte walked past her and pointed. "Only one is real. The others are traps. They'll take you, twist you, and make you part of the house. But the right one will let you go." Charlotte narrowed her eyes. "Why would you help me?" The older Charlotte smiled sadly. "Because I didn't pick the right one." She turned, showing her back, and Charlotte saw it, dozens of eyes blinking beneath her skin, her spine warped like roots growing under bark. She opened a door at random, screamed, and vanished, just like that. Gone, the walls groaned. Time was running out. Charlotte looked at the remaining doors. Each had a name above it now. One said MIA. Another, Gila. The last, KAV, her own initials. She reached for Myas, paused, turned to Julius, hesitated, then looked at the third. Her hand touched the handle, cold. The bone shivered in her palm, as though it recognized her. She turned it. The door didn't open outward. It opened inward, like something pulling her through. There was light, and not the fake, sickly glow of the house, but real light. Morning. Voices. Birds. For a second she saw her old street again. Julia on the porch, waving. Mia riding her bike. Her house, warm and crooked and real. She stepped forward, and the door slammed shut behind her. She stumbled, landing hard on pavement. She was outside. No fog. No twins. No 4th house. Her hands were scraped. Her knees bled. But she was outside. Cars drove by. Neighbors waved. Someone laughed. It was as if nothing had happened. She sat there, dazed, breathing hard, feeling the sun on her face like a stranger's touch. Then she looked down. Her shadow was wrong. It had too many arms, and one of them waved back. The 5th house wasn't on the street. It was in her now. At first, Charlotte told herself it was over. That maybe, just maybe, should outrun whatever ancient thing had opened its mouth and swallowed her world. She clung to that idea like a splintered life raft. She smiled when people said good morning, nodded when the mailman waved, even ate a sandwich that actually tasted like food. The sun felt warm again. The sky stayed blue. But beneath it all, something was wrong. The kind of wrong that didn't scream. It whispered. She didn't sleep that night. Not because of nightmares. Because of how quiet it was. No creaks. No groans. No fog curling beneath the door. Just silence. Thick as syrup. At 3 in the morning, she went outside. The street was gone. Not physically. The asphalt was there. The cracks shed memorized with her bike tires, the familiar curve where the sidewalk dipped too low. But the houses, the people, were different, subtly at first. Windows where there weren't any before. A porch swaying where none had been built. Even the trees lining the road leaned in new directions, their branches twitching like they were listening. She walked. Every step felt heavier. The air pulsed, not with sound, but memory. She felt it pressing into her skin, her bones, like the whole street was exiling forgotten lives. She passed Maya's house. A light was on upstairs. She hesitated, just long enough to see the curtain shift. Then a hand, small gray, 4 fingers. Pulling the curtain back, Mia was gone. She knew that. She'd seen what was left of her. But someone, or something, was still wearing her skin. Charlotte kept walking. The Avery house, her house, was 2 blocks down. She didn't live there anymore. Not since the 4th house grew. But not since her name stopped belonging to her. But as she approached, she saw something that stopped her breath. The mailbox read the Parkers. She blinked. No one named Parker had ever lived there. It was her house. She walked up the drive. Her feet dragged across gravel that looked familiar but felt foreign. The grass was too green, the hedges too neat, and the air smelled like oranges. Her mother's shampoo. The door opened before she touched the knob. A woman stepped out. Brown hair, green eyes, laugh lines, friendly, not Julia, but wearing Julia's face. "Can I help you?" the woman asked. Charlotte opened her mouth to speak. Nothing came out. The woman tilted her head. "Are you lost?" Charlotte finally choked out, "I used to live here." The woman smiled, not unkindly. "Oh, honey, this house has been ours for years." Behind her, a man stepped into view. Broad shoulders, faint beard, holding a mug that said "World's okayest Dad." He waved. "Do you want to come in?" "You look cold," the woman said. Charlotte took a step back. Then another. "Suit yourself," the woman said, her smile never fading. "Have a good night." She closed the door. Charlotte stood frozen on the lawn. She looked back at the mailbox again. The Parkers. She turned away and walked. This time she didn't stop. She crossed into the next neighborhood. Every house looked different, wrong in subtle ways. A chimney that bent at the top like a broken neck. Windows that reflected no light. Lawns too perfect, like plastic. She knew now what this was. Not her world. Not anymore. It looked like home. It tasted like memory. But it had been rewritten. And she was the only footnote left unaided. She passed a park. The playground was empty, except for one swing, slowly rocking. As she neared, a voice called out. "Charlotte." She froze. It was a child's voice. She turned. A boy stood beneath the jungle gym, pale, thin, dressed in clothes 20 years out of fashion. His eyes shimmered. Not with light, but with something like tears trapped in amber. "Do you remember me?" he asked. Charlotte stared, something twisting in her stomach. He looked familiar, but not from her memories. From the names on the walls of the fourth house. "You're one of them," she said softly. The boy nodded. "We all are, and now you are too." "No, I got out." "You didn't." He smiled sadly. "You just left the room." "You're still in the house." She shook her head. "I can feel the sun. I'm awake. This is real. It feels real because you remembered it. But memory isn't proof." He stepped closer. "How many people have said your name today?" Charlotte opened her mouth to answer, then paused. No one. Not even Maya in her messages. Not even the woman at her old house. No one had called her by name. Not once. "Why me?" she asked. "Why do I remember?" "Because you're the last." "The last what?" He didn't answer, just pointed. Behind her she turned, and saw it. The fifth house, no longer hidden, no longer imagined. It stood across the street from the park now, rising like a monument to everything that had been forgotten. Its windows flickered with dim light. Its door was wide open. It wasn't just a house, it was her. Every part of it was built from her memories, her fears, her name. The porch looked like the one from her childhood photo. The shingles were the same color as her old bedroom walls, and the number painted in red above the door was CAV Zalder 5. "Go inside," the boy whispered. "It's time." Charlotte didn't move. She couldn't. "I don't want to become the house. You already are. But if you go inside, you can decide what it remembers." The wind shifted. The swing stopped, and from the open doorway voices poured out, her voice. Julia's laugh, Maya's last scream, the sound of floorboards cracking beneath her feet, the hum of the mirror room, the whisper of her name from a dozen mouths. She stepped forward. Every bone in her body ached with resistance. She crossed the street, climbed the steps, and stood in the doorway. Inside, the house wasn't a house. It was a long hallway, filled with doors, each one labeled with a memory, a real one, her 6th birthday, her first nightmare, her last real hug, and one door at the end, unlabeled, waiting. Charlotte walked. She touched each door as she passed, feeling the heat, the weight, the sorrow inside. When she reached the last one, she turned the handle. Inside was a chair, a mirror, and the book, the same book with her name carved into the cover. Only now it was blank, empty pages, clean, She sat in the chair. The mirror shimmered, and for the first time, her reflection didn't move. It waited, the book opened. A pen appeared in her hand, and she understood. She could write. Not just remember, but write. The house had given her the final room. She looked into the mirror, and began with a name, her own. Charlotte Avery, she wrote. Born, forgotten, survive. And the house around her breathed in her words. And waited. The moment Charlotte's pen touched the first page, the air changed. It thickened, as though the house itself held its breath. The nib scratched across the paper with a strange resistance, like dragging metal over skin. She expected ink, but what spilled onto the page was darker, denser, redder. It soaked through the paper and shimmered faintly, pulsing with every heartbeat. She realized, horrified, that it wasn't ink at all. It was hers, not from a cut, not from a wound. It was pulling directly from her memory. For every word she wrote, she felt something drain from inside her. Not physically, deeper. Like her soul was being wrung out one line at a time. She wrote slowly. Charlotte Avery was born beneath a yellow sky. Her mother sang lullabies she didn't know the words to. Her best friend's name was Maya, and they used to race leaves down the gutter every spring. As the sentences formed, so did the house. It began to breathe differently. The floor under her feet grew warm. The walls stretched, gently, as though the house was making room. And then she heard it, the echo of a laugh. Maya's laugh. From somewhere beyond the mirror. A sound she hadn't heard in what felt like years. Her hand trembled. She kept writing. She remembered what others forgot. She chased the door that wouldn't stay shut. She heard her name when no one else did. Each sentence brought with it a new sensation. Images flashing in her mind like photographs left in the sun too long. Her first bike crash. The time Julia had whispered "Don't look under the bed" just before tucking her in. The taste of metal in the fourth house's tunnel. The scream she hadn't let out when she saw her own name written in that book before. But now the pages were blank. She was the author now. She paused, hand cramping, veins standing out against her pale wrist. The pen throbbed with an unnatural heat. It wanted more. The house wanted more. But each word she gave it took something she wasn't sure she'd get back. She leaned back and stared at the mirror. Her reflection didn't move. Still, empty-eyed. Waiting. She hated it. She hated her. Because she could see it now, the version of herself that hadn't fought. The one who'd given in. Who let the house feed. That version had no scars. No memory. No face. She lifted the pen again. Wrote, "The house is not the end. It only thinks it is. It remembers because it is afraid to forget." The mirror cracked, just once. A hairline fracture ran from top to bottom. Her reflection blinked. And frowned. Charlotte's heart stopped. For the first time, the version inside the mirror moved on its own. It reached toward the glass, pressing its palm against it. Her own hand stayed still. The two didn't match. She stood, the pen clattering to the ground, and stepped closer. The mirror whispered, not in her voice, not in Julia's, not in Maya's, in a dozen voices, layered and sick, all speaking in time, "Write us out, or write us in. Either way, we stay." Charlotte turned away, but the room didn't let her. It twisted. The mirror was now the floor. The chair was upside down. The book floated sideways. Gravity no longer applied here. The house had shed its mask and was showing her the shape beneath. Every wall was now covered in doors, hundreds, and every one had a name she recognized. Eric.
Molly. Daniel. Julia. Mia.
Even names she hadn't known before, but suddenly remembered with perfect clarity. They were all still here, waiting to be written back in, waiting to be remembered. She grabbed the book again and flipped ahead. The pages blurred as they turned on their own, until she reached the final one. A question had been carved into the bottom in shaky letters. "Double cho duawa want tio forget." Charlotte's breath caught. Her name glowed at the top of the page. The question pulsed beneath it. A blank space awaited an answer. She stared at it, numb. "Who do you want to forget?" She could write Julia's name. and maybe be free of the weight of a mother who no longer remembered her. She could write Maya's and erase the echo of that too wide smile. She could write her own and finally rest, but her hand moved on its own and wrote the house. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the room shuddered. The pages curled in the book, blackening at the edges like burning leaves. The mirror shattered into dust. Every door swung open at once, slamming against the walls. Wind poured through the room, howling with the screams of 1,000 lost voices. The ceiling split apart, revealing nothing but a vast sky filled with eyes, blinking, watching, weeping black tears. Charlotte screamed, not out of fear, out of defiance. She threw the book into the air. It didn't fall. It vanished. The room collapsed. Everything went white. When she woke, she was lying in the grass. Real grass. Wet, cold. Dirt beneath her fingernails. Above her the sky was blue. No stitches in the clouds. No crooked birds. No fog. Just sky. The street stretched out ahead, normal again. People walking dogs. Kids on bikes. The fourth house was gone. The twins were gone. Her house stood alone, exactly as it used to. She stood up slowly. The ache was still there, but different now, like waking from a long illness. She stepped inside her home. Julia was in the kitchen, washing dishes, humming. Charlotte stared. Mom. Julia turned, smiled, the right smile. Morning, honey. Tears sprang to Charlotte's eyes. She dropped her bag, ran to her, hugged her tighter than she ever had. Julia hugged her back, but when Charlotte pulled away, her mother's smile faded slightly. Hey, she said softly. What's your name again? Charlotte froze. The world spun, because behind Julia, on the wall calendar, the date read October 4th. Same as it always had. Same as every day for weeks. The street hadn't reset. It had looped. And the house hadn't been destroyed. It had moved deeper, into time, into her. The pen was gone. But the scars on her hands still formed letters. Still fresh. CAV page 1. Charlotte stood still in the kitchen. Her fingers still warm from Julia's embrace, but her chest hollowed out like something had been scooped from inside her. That question, so gentle, so simple, sat in the air like a loaded gun. What's your name again? Julia had asked it with a smile, not fear, not confusion, not malice, but it carved Charlotte in half all the same. It wasn't the question itself. It was what came next. Nothing. No recognition. No flicker of concern. No follow-up. Julia turned back to the sink like she hadn't asked anything at all. Water ran from the tap. Soap foamed over her hands. She hummed the same 3 notes over and over. Charlotte stepped back. The floor creaked. Julia didn't flinch, didn't look, didn't see her. The house wasn't just remembering her anymore. It was replacing her. Replacing everything. This was worse than forgetting. This was unmaking. The timeline had folded in on itself, but now it was different. Smarter. The loop had learned. Before, it used to trap people. Now it rewrote them. Gently, quietly, until they faded out like chalk in the rain. Charlotte left the kitchen. She wandered the house, searching for details she remembered. The crack in the baseboard, gone. The smudge on the hallway mirror, cleaned. The tiny chip on the coffee table's edge where she once dropped her juice box in 2nd grade, gone. All the scars of living had been erased. It was a perfect copy of her life. But it wasn't hers. She opened her bedroom door. The room was pristine. Books lined up in alphabetical order. Bed made tight, hospital corners. Her stuffed rabbit, Harvey, was sitting upright in the center of her pillow, good as new. But his left ear was supposed to be torn. Shed ripped it when she was 7, dragging him too fast across the sidewalk. Julia had sewn it back with pink thread. Now it was whole, flawless. Wrong. Charlotte backed out and closed the door. She descended the stairs slowly. Barefoot, the silence weighing heavier with each step. The sunlight coming through the windows had no warmth. It lit the walls, but not her skin. The same sunlight Shed felt in the 5th house when it tricked her into thinking she had escaped. Outside, the world moved too smoothly, too quietly. A woman jogged past with a stroller, her ponytail bouncing in perfect rhythm. A man watered his lawn, humming a tune she recognized but couldn't place. Birds circled the same tree twice, 3 times. The exact same flight path. She stepped onto the porch, then down onto the grass, and finally into the street. Across from her, the neighbors waved. The Parkers. She waved back automatically, except the mother had Julius eyes, and the father's mug-read Phi 1 daughter love C. Charlotte turned. The mailbox on her lawn didn't say Avery. It said CA 05. She staggered backward. The loop hadn't reset her world. It had absorbed her into it. And now she was the house. The designation. The identifier. She didn't have an address anymore. She had a serial number. She ran. Past her old school. Past the arcade. Everywhere she passed was familiar, but flat. Like walking through a memory reconstructed by someone who had never truly lived it. The faces were correct, the buildings in place, but the life was gone. Conversations didn't ripple out. Laughter didn't echo. People moved like background characters waiting for their cue. She stopped at the playground. It was empty, not just of children, of sound. No wind, no creaking swings, no rustling leaves, just absence. The only thing that remained the same was the mural on the school wall. The one she thought had vanished after the loop. But it hadn't. It had changed. Now, the silhouetted house was front and center. Its door was open, and in the doorway stood her, painted with startling detail, same clothes, same expression, except she was smiling, and behind her, a 5th house had begun to rise. Charlotte turned and ran. She didn't stop until she reached the lot where the 1st house had appeared. The lot where it had all begun. Empty again. But only at first glance. She stepped into the grass. The ground trembled. Something pulsed beneath her feet. Then, without warning, the soil split. A crack zigzagged across the earth, and a hand reached up small, dirty, a child's hand. Then another, dozens, from the dirt. The children shed seen, forgotten, began to claw their way out, silent, blank-eyed. Some were still half-made, limbs missing, skin see-through. Others were stitched together from different memories. A boy with Maya's smile, a girl with Julia's hands. They surrounded her, but did not touch. They just watched. Until one of them whispered, "The loop wants your heart next." She stepped back, voice hoarse. "Why me?" A little girl with no mouth answered anyway, her voice echoing inside Charlotte's skull. "Because you named it." And then, as if someone had turned the page of a great book, everything shifted. The trees melted, the sky blinked, the houses tilted, and she was no longer standing in the neighborhood. She was inside the 5th house again. Back in the long hallway, back in the loop's throat. But now, there was a 6th door, not just growing, beating. It had veins, a pulse, and her name was etched across it, not carved, but grown, like fungus spelling letters on damp wood. Sharote. Just that, no initials, no serial, just her. And underneath it, in tiny, trembling cursive, the one who remembered too much. The loop hadn't failed. It had succeeded. She had fed it more memory than any before her, and now it wanted to become her. The house didn't trap the lost, it wore them. Each iteration cleaner than the last, until no one could tell what was real anymore. Charlotte stepped closer to the 6th door. Behind it, she heard the pen, still scratching, still writing, still bleeding. The book had not burned, it had replicated, and now someone else was writing her story. She pressed her hand to the door. It opened, and her reflection waited on the other side, smiling, pen in hand, ready to begin again. Charlotte stood at the threshold of the 6th door, its pulse echoing in her fingertips. The house no longer pretended to be a place. It had become a mind, a breathing, remembering thing that shaped itself around the people who passed through it. No longer content to trap them. It wanted to be them, and Charlotte had given it more than anyone. She had resisted, fought, named it, and by naming it, she had given it identity, structure, meaning. She had written the story the house could no longer fabricate on its own, and now it was finishing what she started. Inside, the room looked nothing like the others. No chairs, no mirrors, no shelves. The walls were made of paper. Thin sheets covered in tight black handwriting, pages layered on top of one another, fluttering gently like skin in a breeze that didn't exist. And in the center stood a desk. Atop it, the book. Still bleeding, still writing, but the pen moved without a hand. Charlotte approached, her footsteps making no sound. Her own name stretched across every visible surface of the book's open pages, scrawled, repeated, twisted into sentences that unraveled into nonsense and then back into clarity. Some lines were written in reverse. Others bled off the page entirely, forming a spiral of ink that coiled onto the floor and snaked it toward her feet. One sentence pulsed in fresh ink, over and over, glowing faintly. She is the key that forgets itself. Charlotte reached out to touch the pen. The moment her skin made contact, her vision blurred. The room shattered into scenes. Her memories, but not just as she remembered them. They had been distorted, rewritten. Her childhood home shifted between brick and wood. Julia wore different faces, spoke in different languages. Sometimes Charlotte was an only child. Sometimes she had a brother she had never known. One scene showed her standing over a crib that had never existed, humming a lullaby she didn't know she knew. And through every scene, the house lingered, watching, rearranging, editing. The pen jerked in her hand. It wanted to write, not words, commands. Charlotte felt it pull her muscles, twitch her wrist, push her fingers into motion. The sentence on the page shifted beneath her grip. She is the key that forgets itself. The next line was unfinished. Waiting, the pen quivered. And Charlotte realized the horror of it. The house was no longer recording her memories. It was waiting for her to erase them. She could feel it. If she wrote a single name, a single moment, it would be gone. Not just from her mind, from time, erased clean. As if it never happened, she tried to let go of the pen. But it clung to her hand. The room whispered now, not voices, but paper. Thousands of pages rustling softly, as though shivering in anticipation. The words moved across the walls like insects, climbing each other, changing sentences mid-thought. Every word she'd ever spoken twisted into questions. Did she scream when she saw the mirror? Did she ask for help when Mia disappeared? Did she let them in, or were they already inside? She closed her eyes, focused. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about truth. She opened the book to a blank page and began to write. Not what the house wanted, but what she remembered. Every twisted moment, every flicker of unreality. She wrote about the fog, about the mirrored selves, about the looped street, about how the houses had grown, one by one, like tumors in the soil of her mind. She wrote their names: Mia, Julia, Daniel, Eric, Molly, and how they had been devoured, then worn like masks. She wrote the phrase she had feared since the first night: the house isn't haunted, it's alive. As she wrote, the walls rippled, pages peeled back, the ink blowed faster, boiling furious. The house trembled, a voice roared, paper ripping, wood groaning, stone cracking beneath the weight of rage. Wow-R-N-O-T-H-E-O-R. But Charlotte wrote anyway. Faster. The pen dug deeper, her fingers blistered. Blood soaked the edges of the page. The desk cracked in half. The book screamed, not a metaphor, but a high-pitched shriek that made her vision blur. The door behind her slammed shut. The walls peeled, pages flying loose, swirling around her in a cyclone of half-formed truths and desperate lies. She wrote one final sentence. If I must be remembered, I will write myself true. And the pen stopped, dropped from her hand. Everything went still. The book closed itself, pages locked, and then the room folded in. Not exploded, not shattered. Folded, like a paper crane crushed in a fist. Charlotte stood alone in the dark, the air still heavy with the scent of ink and blood and something older. Then, she opened her eyes. She was back on the street. Early morning, fog low to the ground. Her house stood alone. No twins, no fourth, no fifth, just hers. The mailbox read Avery. The sky was pale blue. Birds flew in random patterns. She heard a dog bark. The world felt imperfect again. Real, She walked up to her porch, hands shaking, heart numb. Every step felt like waking up from anesthesia. The front door creaked. The house smelled faintly of burnt toast and cheap shampoo. Julia's voice called from the kitchen, "Morning, sweetheart. Want breakfast?" Charlotte didn't answer at first. She just stood in the doorway, staring. Julia peeked around the corner, eyes soft, warm, real. Charlotte opened her mouth, waited, listened. Julia smiled. "Charlotte, you okay?" Tears slipped down her cheeks. Someone said her name, and it stuck, for now. But as Charlotte sat at the table, she noticed something. A book on the shelf, leather-bound, no title. Its cover shimmered just slightly. She didn't open it, didn't need to, because when she looked out the window, the fog was already rising again. The loop was quiet, sleeping, waiting, and the ink was still wet. The book stayed where it was for days. Charlotte didn't touch it. She didn't have to. It watched her without moving, waited without sound. Nestled between cookbooks and old manuals Julia never used, it looked perfectly mundane. Brown leather cover, no markings, no name. But Charlotte knew. It wasn't just a book. It was the book. The one she had written in. The one that had blood. The one that nearly rewrote her out of existence. Still, life went on. Or seemed to. Julia woke her up in the mornings now with eggs and toast. She kissed her forehead like she used to, humming while she folded laundry and left the bathroom door open with the fan still running. For the first time in what felt like centuries, Charlotte walked to school without dread weighing down each step. The street was whole again. Houses stood still. Faces matched names. People remembered her. But it was never quite right. Sometimes she'd catch herself staring at the trees too long, wondering if the wind rustled them or if something inside them shifted on its own. Sometimes she'd walk past Maya's old house and see a curtain twitch, too fast, too precise. Sometimes the same person would walk past her 3 times in a row on her way to school. Their steps identical, their blink delayed. The world felt like a stitched together copy of a memory she no longer trusted. And always, the book remained. It didn't call to her, not in the traditional sense. No whispering, no pulsing glow. It simply existed, quiet, constant. But she could feel it, like a lump beneath the skin of the world. Every time she passed it, her heart skipped, her fingers itched. It was patient, like the house, like the loop. It didn't need to chase her anymore. It only needed her to look. One night, she found herself at the kitchen counter, staring at it. She hadn't planned to. She'd come down for water. She blinked. There it was, out of place, sitting on the counter, not the shelf, waiting. She stared at it for a long time. Hours, maybe. Long enough for the moon to move across the window pane and the refrigerator to hum twice in its sleep. She didn't move. Then she reached for it. Her fingers hovered above the leather cover, cold, despite the warmth in the kitchen. She didn't open it, not yet, but the air changed as soon as her skin made contact. The lights flickered, only for a moment, then settled. When she lifted the cover, the first page was blank, no title, no author, just white, clean parchment that almost dared her to mark it. She flipped through empty, page after page unspoiled, dozens, hundreds, until one page near the center had writing, in her own handwriting. Words she hadn't written. Charlotte Avery lives in a world that forgot how to dream without being told what to fear. She stared, flipped to the next page. But she is not a memory. But she is not real either. She turned another. The house sleeps, but its doors never close. Her hands trembled. She flipped further ahead and stopped. There she was, a sketch almost like charcoal. Her face, her posture, everything accurate, but drawn with too much detail, too intimate, like someone had stared at her for hours. The eyes were too wide, the shadows too deep. The background behind her head wasn't her bedroom, or her school, or the street. It was the hallway. That hallway. The one lined with doors that led to nothing and everything. On the opposite page was one line, page 312. The moment she remembers what should never be known. Charlotte slammed the book shut. It thudded too loud. Julia called from upstairs, everything okay? Yeah, Charlotte lied. Her hands were slick with sweat. She shoved the book back onto the shelf, but now it didn't fit. The gap was too small. The book had grown. That night, she dreamed again. Not of the house. Not exactly. She was inside a library that stretched in every direction. Floor after floor of endless shelves. No ladders. No stairs. Just floating platforms and drifting shadows. Every book was identical to hers. No titles. No spines. Just blank leather covers. She pulled one down, opened it, and read page 67. Mia forgot her name just before the house took her shape. She opened another. Page 490. Julia never really left. She simply blended too well. Another. Page 398. Charlotte thinks she left the loop. But the loop is just a spiral, and spirals go inward forever. She dropped the book. It fell upward. A soft, echoing laughter rippled through the shelves, but no mouths moved. The shelves tilted, and every book began to open. Pages flapping like wings, ink spilling out and swirling into shapes. Then she woke up, sweating, breathless, and the book was on her nightstand, open to a new page. No writing. Just a single drawn door. It looked identical to her bedroom door. Same scratches, same uneven hinges, except this one was slightly ajar, and inside the darkness beyond it was a figure. Thin, tall, holding a pen. Charlotte turned toward her real door. It was shut. She got up slowly, walked to it, opened it. Nobody was there, just the hallway. Dark, silent. She turned back toward the book, but it was closed again. She picked it up, trembling. Turned to the page with the drawing. Gone. Now it simply read, page 344. She opens the wrong door. Charlotte clutched the book to her chest. It wasn't just writing her story anymore. It was predicting her. She whispered into the quiet house, "Who's reading this?" The silence didn't answer. But somewhere deep in the walls, something shifted. The pages rustled without wind, and a new line bled into existence. The one who never forgets is the one who can never leave. Charlotte didn't sleep after that, because even in the dark, the book was writing, and every word it added felt like one she was losing. The book no longer waited to be opened. Each morning Charlotte found it somewhere new, on the windowsill, on the bathroom sink, sometimes on her pillow with its pages spread wide like wings. It didn't need to lure her anymore. It knew she would read it, even when she told herself not to, even when she locked it in a drawer, duct-taped it shut, buried it beneath a stack of textbooks. The urge would bloom in her chest like an itch too deep to scratch. It wasn't curiosity that pulled her. It was inevitability. The sense that the story was unfolding, whether she turned the pages or not. Each entry felt like a warning, but they arrived too late to stop anything. Page 377, she walks past her reflection and it blinks first. The next morning, that's exactly what happened. In the hallway mirror, she saw herself pause, rub her eyes, and keep walking. But in the corner of her vision, she caught it, the blink, slow, deliberate. Her reflection staring at her a moment too long, closing its eyes after Shed already turned away. She didn't go near that mirror again. The pages got bolder. They didn't just document, they anticipated. Page 392, Charlotte dreams of a hallway again, but this time it remembers her name. That night, she was back in the endless corridor of doors. But they didn't whisper this time. They chanted, her name over and over, rising like a tide. She pressed her hands to her ears, but it didn't matter. The sound wasn't entering through her ears anymore. It was inside her blood, and when she opened one of the doors, it led to her bedroom, but wrong. The walls were made of stacked books, each one bleeding ink. Her bed was made of paper, and sleeping in it was another Charlotte, older, still, eyes open, smiling. Charlotte woke gasping, heart pounding, hands stained with black streaks. She stumbled to the bathroom sink, turned on the water. It ran red. She stared at it, unblinking. Then she turned toward the mirror. There was no reflection. Just words scrawled across the glass in backwards dripping script. We are reading this together. She ran. Down the stairs. Out the front door. Onto the street. She didn't care that it was still dark. She didn't care that the sky looked too low, the stars blinking in perfect sync. She just ran. But the street kept repeating itself. Same fire hydrant, same mailbox, same sliver of gum smashed into the sidewalk. She'd done 2 full loops before she realized what was wrong. The houses didn't change. The sky didn't shift. And the fog, light at first, was rolling in again. Not creeping, not crawling, but stalking. Every time she turned her head, it was closer, thicker, like it was waiting for her to collapse. She ran until she couldn't anymore, until she fell to her knees on a street that no longer looked like hers. This road had no signs. The houses had no numbers. All the windows were lit, but behind them were shapes, not people. Some stood still, others swayed slightly, but all were watching. Charlotte stood slowly. She was in the loop again. Maybe Shed never left, or maybe the loop had followed her out. She walked to the nearest door, knocked once. It opened on its own. Inside, the walls were made of books. Not shelves, books. Cemented, stacked, pressed into the shape of a home. Their pages turned as she walked by, whispering softly, as if shivering from her presence. And there, in the center of the living room, sat a reader, not human, not whole. Its face was a swirling mask of pages, constantly folding and unfolding, revealing new expressions with each turn. Its fingers were quills, and it was writing. Endlessly. The pen scratched in rhythm with her heartbeat. Charlotte stepped forward. The creature stopped, lifted its head, spoke with a voice like rustling leaves. "You made us real." Charlotte shook her head. "I didn't ask to. You named us," it replied. "You wrote when you should forgotten. I didn't want to forget them. Then you will join them." It held up the page it was writing on. And there she was, her entire life, her fears, her name, and a final sentence waiting. The reader dipped its quill, paused, then offered it to her. "Finish the story." She backed away. "I'm not writing anything." "You already are." Behind her, the house groaned. The book on the wall opened its pages and flipped rapidly, each one bearing her face, screaming, melting, erased. "You can leave," the creature said softly, "but not as you." Charlotte closed her eyes, tried to focus, tried to remember the real world, the real Julia, the real Mia, the version of herself who hadn't stared too long, who hadn't gone into that house the first time. But the memories were slipping, pages turning backward, faces losing definition. She clenched her fists. "No," she said. "You don't get to write me." The reader cocked its head. "We already have." Then it pointed behind her. She turned and saw herself, stepping through the front door of the house. Not a version of her, not a memory. Her, wearing the same clothes, eyes wide, like it was just now happening, the beginning, again. Charlotte screamed. The book burst into flame. The room twisted, folding inward. And she fell, through the floor, through the loop, through the dark, until she landed on her bed, morning sunlight on her face, the book gone, the shelf empty, her heart silent. But beneath her mattress, something shifted, softly, patiently. A new book, blank, but not for long, because somewhere inside the walls, the reader still scratched its pen, waiting for the next page. And this time, it wasn't asking for permission. Charlotte didn't scream when she found the new book beneath her mattress. She didn't cry, didn't run, didn't even flinch. Something inside her had changed, or broken, or worse, adapted. The weight of the pages in her hands felt familiar now. Too familiar. The leather binding was softer than before, almost warm to the touch, like it had been resting against flesh. Her name wasn't on the cover. It didn't need to be. Every inch of it breathed with her presence. The book knew her. Knew her bones, her secrets, her silences. She sat on the floor with it balanced in her lap, sunlight trickling in through the curtains, mocking her with its false warmth. The world outside chirped and hummed like nothing had ever gone wrong. But in her hands sat the proof that everything still was wrong, and that it was far from finished. The first page was blank. Then the ink began to appear, slowly, like veins surfacing beneath pale skin. Page 1, she thinks this is the beginning again. It isn't. She flipped to the next. Page 2, there are no beginnings, only softer endings wearing new clothes. Charlotte swallowed hard. The next page was a full paragraph. Charlotte believes she's reading. But this time, she is being read. Every word she absorbs, the book absorbs her back. Each glance a tether. Each breath a footstep deeper. She slammed it shut. The silence after the closing felt disappointed. She stood and shoved the book back under the mattress, jamming it between the box spring and bed frame, as if suffocating it might matter. Then she grabbed her backpack, got dressed, and left the house. No breakfast. No goodbye to Julia, if Julia was still Julia. The sun was out. Birds flitted between the power lines. Her sneakers slapped the pavement too loudly. Everything looked normal. But it was the kind of normal that followed a lie. Too polished. Too rehearsed. Everyone she passed smiled a beat too late. A dog barked in perfect intervals. And a man she didn't recognize waved from his porch with a paper in his lap. But she saw it wasn't a newspaper. It was a script, printed in courier font, her name highlighted. Charlotte quickened her pace. The school building loomed ahead. She didn't plan to go in. She just needed somewhere. But when she reached the front steps, she saw it. Spray painted on the bricks in jagged, frantic black letters STOPRINDORITB. She froze. Her breath fogged in the air. Even though it was June, she turned, and Mia was there, standing at the end of the walkway, wearing the same smile from the arcade, the same one from the hallway mirror. "Hey," she said. Charlotte backed up. "You're not real. I'm as real as you need me to be. I saw you. In the fourth house. In the mirror. In the loop." Mia shrugged. "Maybe. But what matters now is that the story wants you back. You wrote your way out." "It didn't like that." "I didn't write my way out." Charlotte spat. "I fought." I remembered. "That's the same thing." Mia stepped closer. Charlotte didn't move. "You're not writing the story anymore," Mia said, voice soft. "The book is. And it's tired of waiting. I buried it." "No, you fed it." Charlotte's mouth dried. Mia reached into her jacket, pulled out the book. Her book. Pages fluttered in the breeze, but the wind had stopped. She held it open. "Read." Charlotte shook her head. "Don't make me," she whispered. "I'm not," Mia said gently. "You already are." Charlotte's eyes fell to the page, against her will, and the line waiting there read page 13. Charlotte looked down, and the book smiled. Her body shivered, because the book did smile. The paper curled at the edges, the ink pulsed, and the letters twisted slowly, shifting their shape. The words rearranged themselves. Charlotte didn't run. Charlotte understood. She dropped it, stepped back. Mia didn't move. The book lay open on the ground. A new sentence writing itself. Charlotte goes back to where it began. Her house. The first door. The empty lot that wasn't. She turned and ran, faster than before. Every street corner repeated itself. Every person she passed had no face. Their features blurred, as if reality had stopped buffering them in. When she reached her street, the house was waiting. Not hers. Not anymore. The fifth house, standing proud. Complete. Its windows all open, gaping. Its door swinging gently on rusted hinges. Inside, a light glowed. A writing desk. An empty chair. And another version of her, already sitting, pen in hand. Charlotte stopped on the porch. "Don't," she whispered. The other her didn't turn, but she spoke. "You think you escaped?" "I did." "No," the voice said, quieter now. "You just flipped the page." Charlotte stepped forward, shaking. "I don't want to be remembered by this place." "You already are." Then the girl in the chair turned. Her face was blank. No eyes, no mouth. Just a flat mask of skin stretched smooth. And yet she whispered anyway. Page 14. Charlotte Avery sits down again. The chair screeched. Another pen appeared in her hand. She couldn't stop her legs, couldn't stop her fingers. She sat. The paper bloomed with ink. Her story continued. Because stories, like houses, never die. They just wait for the next chapter. The pen trembled in Charlotte's hand like a living thing. It pulsed with a rhythm not her own, every beat a command wrapped in ink. The page below glowed faintly, like the paper was breathing, waiting, hungry. The desk groaned beneath her elbows, and the chair creaked every time her body shifted. But she couldn't move. Not really. Her muscles obeyed something else now. Something older, slower, rooted not in flesh but in memory. Not her memory. The houses. She stared at the page, blank, but not empty. The moment her hand lowered, words appeared, not formed by her mind, not summoned by her will, but leaking from a well she had no control over. Her fingers curled around the pen, and she watched helpless as the first line formed page 14. The house has many doors, but only one name. And it wears her face now. Charlotte tried to stop. Her arm twitched, rebelled, but the pen kept dragging itself forward across the page like a needle sewing skin. Page 15, Charlotte thought she could fight it, thought she could write her way out. But ink never forgets. It only waits for its turn to speak. She tried to drop the pen. Her fingers would not obey. Behind her, the door of the house swung closed with a final, soft click. The sound echoed, not through the room, but through her thoughts, as if sealing off any idea of escape. She was no longer in a room. She was in the sentence. Each breath she took echoed in rhythm with the turning of a page somewhere unseen. The desk began to shift. Slowly, imperceptibly, it grew larger. The pages multiplied, stacked themselves, and on every page her name appeared. Not once, not twice, thousands of times. Written in different handwriting, in different eras. Cursive, print, block letters. Some in languages she couldn't recognize. All of them, hers. The floor beneath her cracked open, not split, but folded down like a trapdoor made from thought. A staircase revealed itself, built from books, bound in leather, blood stained, all blank, waiting. A voice whispered up from the bottom of the stairwell, not loud, not threatening, worse, inviting. Come write what was left unwritten. Charlotte stood. The pen remained in her hand, though she never remembered tightening her grip. She walked down. Each step groaned like it had been waiting too long to be touched again. The walls breathed. Every breath whispered her name in dozens of accents, some familiar, some ancient. At the bottom of the staircase, the room opened wide. It wasn't a room anymore. It was a library, a living one. The shelves pulsed like lungs. The books oozed ink from their spines. The floor rippled under her shoes like water hiding a heartbeat, and in the center, at the eye of this ink storm, was the reader. No face, only blank pages. It sat at a throne made of torn out paragraphs and broken pens. Around it, pages fluttered like wings. Charlotte didn't speak, didn't ask what it wanted. She knew. It stood, stepped down from the throne, held out its hands, and in one it offered her a page, one single page, her last one. It was blank. She looked down at the pen in her grip. It was bleeding now, not ink, not even metaphor, real blood. Hers. She staggered back. No, she said. No more. The reader tilted its head, then pointed. Behind her the shelves cracked open like jaws, and out stepped Julia, but not quite. Her body intact, her smile wrong, empty eyes. Ink dripped from her mouth like venom. She reached for Charlotte. Write me back, Julia whispered. Write me real. Then Mia, then Eric, then Molly. Then every face Charlotte had watched disappear, one by one, into the loop. All stepping out from the shelves. Half written, glitching, begging. Finish us, remember us, complete us. And finally, another Charlotte. The one from the mirror. The one who blinked second. She stood at the end of the line, calm, perfect, and smiling. You will write, she said, or you'll be rewritten. The reader dropped the final page at her feet. The blood pooled across it, and the words began to appear, without her hand, without a pen. They crawled across the parchment on their own, letter by letter. Page 16, Charlotte Avery understood at last. This was never a story she told. It was one told through her, and every moment she resisted, she only gave it more power. Her defiance was ink, her memory the spine. Charlotte fell to her knees. The voices swarmed around her. The reader stepped forward. One last whisper in her ear, you thought the book was haunted. Charlotte trembled. It isn't. The reader didn't answer. It simply turned the page. And on it, page 17, Charlotte Avery becomes a library. The ceiling peeled away like sky burned open. The shelves expanded. She could feel her arms stretching, her bones splintering into words, her ribs opening like covers, her voice torn into index cards. Every thought alphabetized, every memory cataloged. The ink flooded her veins. She didn't scream. She couldn't. Books don't scream. They wait. They echo. They remember. And as the final page settled, a new book formed on the nearest shelf. No title. No author. Only a name. C. Avery, Volume I, and next to it, Volume 2, still blank, waiting. There is no sunrise inside a book. No ticking clock. No scent of morning dew or sound of footsteps on gravel. There is only the slow turn of a page and the hush that follows, as if the words themselves are holding their breath. That was the first thing Charlotte noticed after the transformation. Time didn't move forward anymore. It unfolded like a chapter torn out of sequence, read and reread until the ink wore thin. She didn't remember the moment her body stopped being hers. Not completely. She recalled pieces, her fingers becoming lines, her bones softening into bindings, her breath pressed flat between pages. But not the pain. The house had been merciful in that way. Or maybe strategic. There was no agony in being rewritten, just surrender, a soft drifting into silence, like falling asleep while someone else whispers your story into your mouth. Charlotte was a book now. But she was also more. She was the shelf. She was the desk. She was the voice that asked, "Do you remember what you were before the ink?" And somewhere in the center of that impossible library, she still was. Something like Charlotte, stitched together from stories and silence, pacing the endless halls between bookshelves built from names. She became the librarian, not by choice, but because every story needs someone to carry it. The reader no longer stood at the throne of pages. It had vanished the moment Charlotte took her final form. Perhaps it had always been a shadow of her, a warning, a placeholder until the real author arrived. Now, she wandered. Not in flesh, but in thought. Each eisel whispered to her as she passed. Each book called out, not with words, but with longing. These were lives never finished. Children never remembered. Screams never heard. Some stories were only a page long, ending abruptly with lines like she knocked on the door. And it opened. Others stretched on, spiraling into madness, whole chapters repeating like echo chambers. Charlotte tried not to read them, because when she did, she felt them, and they felt her back. But the worst were the books that were still writing themselves. She could hear the scratching, soft, constant, ceaseless. The voices mumbling between the lines. Each time someone in the world above remembered a strange house on a street that shouldn't exist, a new sentence appeared. Each time someone dreamed of mirrors that blinked first, of rooms that folded, of doors that should never have opened, more ink blood. The loop hadn't been destroyed. It had only been organized, sorted, shelved. One afternoon, though time no longer meant anything, Charlotte came upon a book with no spine. It quivered when she touched it. Its cover was slick, warm, stitched with names she couldn't pronounce. When she opened it, the first page was a mirror. Her own face stared back. Not as she was now, but as she had been before it all began. Before the first knock. Before Maya disappeared. Before the floor split open and hands reached up from beneath her bed. The face in the mirror mouthed something. One word. Run. Charlotte tried to close the book, but it stuck to her hands. The pages peeled back violently, and with each turn she was dragged through it. Back. Through her memories, her kitchen, her school, her bed, the floorboards, the tunnel, and then the street. Whole again. Real. Her lungs filled. Air. Wind. Sky. She was standing in front of her house, but different, smaller, like she was 10 again, a child. Charlotte looked down at her hands. No scars, no ink, no bleeding pages, just skin, just hers. Behind her, a voice called out, "Come inside, honey!" Julia's voice, warm, whole, real. Charlotte turned. Her mother waved from the porch. The smell of toast and jam drifted on the breeze. And for a moment, Charlotte believed. But then she noticed it. The mailbox, it didn't say Avery. It said CAV1000, the original, the first version, the prototype memory. And beneath it, scribbled in faint red marker, please return to shelf when finished. Charlotte didn't move, because now she understood. This wasn't an escape. This was a reprint. The book had let her out, yes, but only to catalog her again. In a better cover, a new edition, and the librarian, her true self, was still back there, still turning pages, still writing new endings. This version of her, it was just another story waiting to be borrowed. Charlotte opened the mailbox. Inside, a letter addressed to her in looping black ink, page 18, and when she woke, she found the story was still reading her. The door creaked open behind her. Julia stepped out, but her shadow was wrong. It stretched sideways like a smear across the porch, and in her hand she held a book. Brown, leather, bound, and smiling. Charlotte didn't run. She couldn't. Because this wasn't her world. It was the house's now, and she was only ever the bookmark. Marking time. Waiting to be turned again. Charlotte didn't scream. Screaming required breath, and something about this place stole at first. Not painfully, not even suddenly. Just quietly, like a thief slipping a watch off your wrist, while whispering in your ear, that time doesn't matter here anyway. She stood on the porch of a house that should have been home, facing a woman wearing her mother's voice, holding a book that pulsed like a beating heart. And Charlotte understood, without needing to be told, that the chapter hadn't ended. It had only taken a breath. The book in Julia's hand wasn't the same one that had followed Charlotte through mirrors and dreams. This one was darker, older, as if it had been buried underground for years and only now decided to surface again. Its leather cover cracked at the corners, veins of ink webbed across it like scars. No title, no clasp, just weight, presence. And it watched. Julia, if she was Julia, held it out, smiling like a mother would when handing her child a favorite bedtime story. But her smile was stretched too far. Eyes glassy with something Charlotte knew too well now, the absence of personhood. She was a shape that had once been someone. A paragraph worn thin, now filled in with another's handwriting. Charlotte stepped back. No, she whispered. Julia's smile twitched, not into a frown, but something worse, a flatness, like a page being turned before its sentence finished. You left pages unwritten, she said, voice lilting, detached. That was unwise. I never agreed to write any of this. Didn't you? Julia tilted her head, then opened the book. Charlotte didn't look. She didn't have to. She felt what was on the page. Her name, over and over. Every variation, every iteration. A full list of every Charlotte Avery the house had ever consumed, rewritten, rebuilt. Hundreds of versions, some older, some younger, each one blurring at the edges. And at the bottom of the list, CAV, current. Charlotte blinked, and the list shimmered. The word current flickered, changed. Pending. No, Charlotte whispered again. No more. But the house didn't speak in answers. It spoke in structures. And it was building her future sentence by sentence. Every step she took backward became italicized. Every refusal marked her with footnotes. She had become a story under heavy revision, a protagonist lost in endless rewrites. Behind her, the wind rose, but it didn't carry leaves or dust. It carried pages, hundreds of them, torn from mouths and memory. They fluttered around her in a storm of forgotten stories, brushing her cheeks, catching in her hair, whispering old lives into her ears. Charlotte who chose the tunnel. Charlotte who turned the mirror. Charlotte who screamed first. Charlotte who wrote her mother into the wall. She swatted them away, but the pages stuck, clung to her skin, melded. She looked down. They were becoming her clothes. Threaded through her arms, her chest, wrapping around her ribs like binding cords. And still, Julia stood smiling. The book open now, pages flipping themselves, faster, relentless. She is ready, the wind said, though it used no voice. She is remembered. The porch groaned, each board speaking in chorus. "She is ours," the house whispered. And the door behind Julia creaked open again. Only it wasn't a house anymore. It was a library. The same endless rows, the same breathing shelves. And there, in the far distance, Charlotte saw herself, a younger her, running, the first version, the original, still unmarked, still free. Charlotte lunged, not toward Julia, not toward the book, toward the door, through it, into the library. The house howled behind her, a sound like paper screaming in a fire. She ran past shelves that groaned her name, past books that blinked, past a table where Maya sat folded over a book she could never close. She didn't look. She didn't speak. She just ran, until she reached her, the girl, Charlotte, age 10, wearing the red hoodie, dirt on her knees, breathing hard, staring into an empty lot, the one before it ever began, the one where nothing had grown yet. Charlotte touched her shoulder. The girl flinched, turned, and for a moment, just a moment, there was no loop, no house, just recognition. Charlotte knelt. "You don't go in," she whispered. The girl nodded, then blinked, and Charlotte saw the truth. It wasn't her, not the first version, not even a real one, just another draft, another echo, another page. The child opened her mouth and spoke in the reader's voice. "You can't run from what you wrote." Charlotte's scream died in her throat as the world crumpled inward. The shelves closed. The lights went out. The page flipped. She was back on her bed, morning again. The same sun, the same birds, the same lie. She sat up slowly, afraid to breathe. And there, on her nightstand, lay the book, still closed, still silent. But a note had been left on top in childlike handwriting. "We stopped at chapter 16. Would you like to continue?" Charlotte didn't touch it, but she didn't throw it away either, because part of her knew she already had. The note stayed on her nightstand for 3 days. Charlotte stared at it each morning, pretending it was just a scrap of paper. Something meaningless, a dream souvenir, but deep down she knew it wasn't a request. It was a cue, a stage direction written in soft pencil, left by something that never slept and never forgot. "Would you like to continue?" It didn't ask with malice. It didn't even ask with curiosity. It asked with certainty, as if the answer had already been recorded and was simply waiting for her to catch up to it. She didn't reply. She barely slept. And when she did, her dreams were white. Not blank, white. Blinding rooms filled with soft static where the walls pulsed in time with her heartbeat. She'd wander those rooms endlessly, hearing pages turning in far-off corners, but never finding the source. Always just out of reach, always just one sentence behind. On the 4th day, her reflection changed. She noticed it brushing her teeth. A delay, a hesitation, just one beat too long. When she turned her head, her reflection kept staring. No blink, no twitch, no shame. Just steady, knowing stillness. A person no longer mirroring but watching. Charlotte spoke. "Stop." Her reflection tilted its head, grinned, and whispered, "You already did." She didn't look in the mirror after that. She went to school. Or tried. She sat in class while the teacher spoke in soft loops, repeating the same lesson 3 times without anyone noticing. At lunch, Mia waved to her from across the cafeteria, mouth moving in slow, distorted silence. Charlotte turned away, only to hear the same greeting again from behind her. Same words, same smile, same voice. The lunchroom was a carousel of people pretending to forget they'd already said everything before. Charlotte left. Outside, the sky had begun to fray. Not break, fray. Tiny seams appeared in the clouds, threads pulling loose to reveal something black and wide beneath. The sun glitched once, flickered, then resumed as though someone had tapped a broken bulb. Charlotte didn't walk home. She walked to the lot, the empty one, where the first house had appeared, where it had grown. It was still empty, grass untouched, fence still crooked. The earth beneath it looked peaceful, stupid in its calm. She stepped through the rusted gate, knelt, dug her fingers into the dirt, and pulled. Nothing but soil. She dug deeper. Her nails cracked, blood mixed with mud. Still nothing. But she felt it. Beneath, Waiting. It was always waiting. She sat in the center of the lot as the wind picked up and the sky continued to fray above her. The edges of the neighborhood blurred. People repeated conversations across the street. A child laughed 3 identical times. A crow passed overhead in a loop, over and over. The loop was thinning, not just the one in her dreams. This one. The world. And Charlotte understood her refusal to continue the story hadn't stopped it. It had starved it, and now it was eating itself to survive. A figure appeared across the lot. The reflection. The one from the mirror. Same face, same red hoodie, but the eyes, blank, hollow, like paper burned from the inside out. It stepped closer. "You don't get to quit," it said calmly. Charlotte didn't flinch. "I didn't quit. I refused." Same thing here. The reflection raised its hand, held up a book. The book, open to the middle. The ink blotted off the page like sweat, dripping into the ground. "Every moment you deny the story," the reflection said, "another page unwrites itself. And when there are no more pages," Charlotte finished the sentence, "there's no more me." The reflection smiled. "You're learning." Charlotte stood, walked toward the mirror version of herself, took the book. It was cold. So cold it burned. The page it held showed a sentence still forming. "Page 19, Charlotte," finally said yes. She tore it out, ripped it clean, and the ground split beneath them. No noise, no scream. Just a silence so dense it pressed against her skull, like pressure at the bottom of the sea. The reflection collapsed, not in pain, like a puppet losing its strings. Its mouth split into a soft, grateful grin as it fell to ash. Charlotte stared at the torn page in her hand. The ink hadn't stopped. It was still moving, crawling, trying to rewrite the words she'd just destroyed. She opened her own mouth, and for the first time in days, spoke with purpose. No, the ink froze. The sky split, and the lot beneath her feet folded downward like the flap of an envelope. She fell, hard, through words, through letters, through footnotes and marginalia and broken sentences, until she landed, back in her room, panting, heart thudding, on her bed. The nightstand was empty, the book gone, and on her hand, written in smudged black ink, 5 new words. "This page was never yours." Charlotte stared at them, and realized something horrible. The story hadn't ended. It had just changed authors. Charlotte sat motionless, staring at the words scrawled across her hand. This page was never yours. The ink had already begun to fade, seeping into her skin like it had always belonged there. But the message lingered, louder than any scream, louder than any whisper. The story hadn't stopped because she closed the book. It had shifted hands. She was no longer the pen, no longer the paper, just a character again. A marionette between paragraphs. A set of lines waiting to be delivered. She stood slowly, every muscle stiff like her body had been shelved overnight. The room was quiet, too quiet. The kind that made silence feel deliberate, like someone had muted the world just for her. Charlotte crossed to the window and peeked through the blinds. The sky looked normal. The neighborhood sat still, but none of it felt watched anymore. No looping figures, no mirrored birds, not even a flicker of déjà vu, just static. Something was wrong, not wrong like before, wrong in a way that felt new. The book hadn't returned to the nightstand. It was truly gone. No pages flapping in her drawers. No words appearing on the mirrors. No new chapters scrawling themselves across her ceiling. But its absence felt heavier than its presence ever had, like a sudden quiet in a room that had always buzzed with unseen conversation. The air was too thin now, the light too still. She turned on the TV, static, every channel. She picked up the phone, no dial tone. Her heart thudded once hard. She rushed downstairs. Julia's coffee mug sat in its usual place on the counter, still steaming. But Julia wasn't there. The kitchen hummed with electricity, with routine, but not with life. "Mom," no answer. Charlotte opened the back door. The yard was empty. The world didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused. She ran into the street, calling her neighbors' names. The Parkers, Mrs. Blevins. Even the mailman. No one came. No one peeked from windows. No one watched from porches. The world had lost its cast. Charlotte was alone in the story now, completely alone, and still the silence stretched. She walked down the center of the road. Her shoes echoed louder than they should. The wind didn't touch her. Her shadow barely clung to her feet. The houses on either side stood tall and quiet, like unread books sealed shut. Then she saw it, at the end of the street, a figure. Still, faceless, wearing a long coat made of paper. Pages flapping gently around its ankles, even though there was no breeze. Charlotte approached cautiously. "Are you the reader?" she asked. The figure didn't answer, but the pages on its coat rustled once, as if reacting to her voice. Then its chest opened, not tore, not split, opened, like a book cover parting. Inside was a typewriter, keys ancient and worn, its metal curled with rust. But the ribbon was new, still slick with ink, and a single sheet of paper was in place. Typed on it was a sentence. Page 20. Charlotte understood too late that the story didn't need a book anymore. Charlotte backed away. But her name typed itself out on the next line. Charlotte Avery. Then, spoken, heard. Forgotten, she turned and ran, back up the street, back toward her house. But every house she passed had changed. Their windows now held mirrors. Their doors had no handles, and the mailboxes no longer bore names, only page numbers. She passed her house, but it was gone. Not destroyed, not stolen, just gone. In its place was a blank lot, not even grass, just white, endless, stretching, waiting, like a margin. Charlotte screamed into it, a raw, desperate noise that should have shaken the world. But the white just absorbed it, turned it into text. The words floated midair, burned black into nothing. Charlotte screamed. The page did not bend. Then, the author arrived, and the faceless figure stood behind her. It didn't reach out, didn't touch her. It simply stood, and the typewriter in its chest clicked again. Page 21. She realized the story could write itself now. The white expanded, everything folded, the street, the sky, her name. Reality buckled like a chapter that had gone on too long. Charlotte looked down at her hands. They were gone, not bleeding, not erased, just revised. She felt herself lifting, pages curling around her. And then, silence, real silence. The kind that doesn't wait for the next word. And somewhere, in a library that doesn't exist, a new book slid into place on a shelf of faceless names. It had no cover, no spine, no title. Just a page number burned across the front, 21. And counting. Charlotte wasn't gone. Not entirely. Not yet. What remained of her drifted in a space without shape or boundary, a limbo of parchment and breathless pause. She was thought. Residue. The echo of a word once spoken, and now hovering in the throat of something ancient. A story paused mid-sentence, waiting for the pen to drop again. This wasn't death. It wasn't life either. It was the place between words, between reality and revision. She floated in a blankness that moved like smoke, folding and unfolding around her, never touching, yet feeling. The white wasn't empty. It was saturated with possibility. Each step she thought to take whispered with the promise of a new paragraph. Each breath laced with the scent of old ink and forgotten fear. There were no shadows because there was no light. Just the subtle shimmer of untold stories brushing against her skin like fingers. And she could hear it now. Beneath everything, the steady clatter of a typewriter, somewhere distant, tireless, relentless. Typing not in haste, but in purpose. Charlotte knew instinctively it was still writing her, and it didn't care whether she approved. She wanted to scream, to claw her way back to something real, but her mouth wouldn't open. Her thoughts formed, but the words were taken from her before she could speak them, absorbed by the white, rewritten, rephrased, edited. Every idea filtered through someone else's syntax, someone else's narrative arc. Then came the door. It didn't appear. It was an outline etched in negative space, barely distinguishable until she walked straight into it. Her fingers brushed the seam, and suddenly it was solid, warm, wooden, pulsing like it had veins of ink running through it. On the wood, a brass plate C. Haraloda VRY, DRF 3.2.1. She didn't want to open it. Didn't want to know what version she was anymore. But it opened for her. Inside was a hallway, long, narrow, walls lined with bookshelves that moved when she blinked. Not literally. They relocated, rearranged, like chess pieces responding to an unseen strategy. At the far end, a mirror stood propped against the wall, cracked. Familiar. Behind the glass, movement. Not hers. Charlotte walked, each step echoing with a memory she hadn't thought in years. Her first time writing a story. Her hand trembling. Her teacher praising her. Her parents calling it morbid. A dream about a hallway with no end. A door that never unlocked. A name whispered in the static between television channels. CAV. When she reached the mirror, it no longer showed a reflection. It showed a page. Typed, clean, she leaned in to read it. Page 22. She's beginning to remember. The first time she wrote her name. The first time it wrote back. The mirror shimmered, and then showed her childhood bedroom. Soft pink walls, posters peeling, and on the desk, her old diary. Charlotte felt her knees buckle. That diary, the one she lost in the move when she was 12. The one she swore she'd packed. She stepped forward and fell into the mirror. No resistance, no transition, just sudden placement. Now in her old room, now seated at the desk. The diary open, a pen in her hand, but she couldn't control it. Her fingers moved without her. They scribbled furiously, dragging ink across the page. Line after line, words she didn't think, thoughts she didn't recognize. And on the opposite page, faint but legible, I see you watching. I see you reading. I see you writing me. She gasped, the ink froze, then rewrote itself in real time. No, we see you. Charlotte tried to close the diary, but her hands wouldn't move. Then the paper turned to glass beneath her palms, and a face appeared. Not hers, not Julius, not Maia's, just a face, blank, formless. Its mouth moved, but no sound came. Then behind the face she saw rows and rows of chairs, occupied, all looking at her. Children, teens, adults, all watching, eyes unblinking, books in their laps, open, pages flipping in sync. Every book had the same title, The Girl Who Forgot She Was Written. Charlotte staggered back, but the room shifted with her. Now a stage, now the audience murmuring. A spotlight burned down on her. The diary now a microphone. The face, still blank, began to speak, not aloud. Inside her head, this is your reading. They've been waiting. Don't disappoint. Charlotte turned, searching for a way out. But behind her, the stage ended, and the void began. No pages, no ink, just erasure. A place where characters go when the reader looks away. Her choice was clear, speak or vanish. So she stepped to the edge, held the diary tight, and whispered, I was real once. The audience leaned forward. The books on their laps turned another page. And somewhere, deep beneath this stage, the typewriter paused. Just for a moment. Before resuming. Faster this time. More frantic. More needy. Because now the author was listening too. And it didn't like to be interrupted. The spotlight dimmed, but didn't vanish. It pulled inward, tighter on Charlotte's face, as though the stage itself had grown impatient. Her skin itched beneath the heat, and her voice trembled in the back of her throat. Not from fear, but from something far worse, recognition. This moment had happened before, not just in dreams or loops or twisted mirror images. It had been written once, drafted, long ago, in margins she had never read, by hands she would never see. Below the stage, the audience leaned forward in synchrony. Not blinking, not breathing, not truly there. Shadows of readers. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflections of whatever page they were stuck on. Some had mouths moving in time with hers, some flipped pages that didn't exist. And above them all, in the rafters of this impossible theater, the typewriter echoed like thunder without storm clouds. Charlotte swallowed hard. You want me to say it, she said. The audience did not reply. But their books did. All of them, simultaneously, turned to the same page. She heard it, an invisible wave of paper, 1,000 pages turning at once, and then came the whisper. From every seat, every lap, every torn journal and half-written diary, tell us how it ends. Charlotte backed up a step. I don't know how it ends. You do, said the voice in her mind, the author, not loud, not forceful, but expecting. It spoke like someone watching a game they had already won, waiting patiently for the pieces to realize the board had been fixed from the beginning. The diary in her hands began to shift, its cover peeled, its pages curled, the ink inside twisted into lines she hadn't written. Not in this version, but they had her handwriting, her phrasing. It was her. Or rather, it had been. Across the inside flap, scrawled in the same awkward 12-year-old cursive, Charlotte Avery. Dio non read me. She flipped to the first page. It was a memory, but not from her life. She recognized it anyway, running through a hallway. Door after door, hands grabbing, voices calling her name. Ink dripping from the ceiling, the word mirror scribbled dozens of times. And at the bottom of the page, page 23, she tried to remember what she'd forgotten. But the forgetting had been written first. Charlotte looked out at the audience again. Their faces were beginning to change. Not melt, not shift. Rearrange. Each eye now shaped like a comma. Each mouth curled like parentheses. Their bones bent like quotation marks. She wasn't staring at people. She was looking at grammar. Living punctuation. Watchers made not of flesh, but structure. The building blocks of narrative. And they wanted a conclusion. She dropped the diary. It vanished before it hit the stage. Why me? She asked the void above her. The lights blinked. The stage cracked beneath her feet. And the author answered, not in her ears, but directly behind her eyes. Because you tried to stop reading. Because you looked away. And stories don't forgive abandonment. She dropped to her knees. The stage pulsed beneath her. The spot where the diary had vanished now sprouted a new object, a quill. Not a pen. A quill, its feather impossibly dark. Tips dripping not with ink, but something deeper, thicker. Charlotte reached for it instinctively. The audience inhaled. Their pages froze. Everything went still. The moment stretched like skin pulled too far. And then she wrote. One word. Just one. Enough. The stage exploded in silence. The walls of the theater didn't fall. They unraveled. The audience dissolved into floating letters, breaking apart and spinning into the void. Charlotte stood again, the quill still in her hand. But now she wasn't on a stage. She was in a room. Bare. White. Familiar. Her childhood bedroom. The original version. Before mirrors turned malicious. Before drawers bled ink. Before stories hunted. Her breath came fast. And then she saw it. On the desk. The real book. Bound in her skin. Her thoughts. Her voice. It no longer smiled. It trembled. Charlotte walked toward it. And when she opened it, the pages were blank. Every one. Except the first. It said only this is where the author learned fear. She slammed it shut. And outside the window, the world blinked. The street reappeared. The loop stuttered. And for the first time since the first page, the typewriter stopped. The silence left behind by the halted typewriter didn't soothe. It suffocated. It pressed against Charlotte's chest like water on the verge of collapse, too still, too thick, waiting to become something else. She stood frozen in the middle of her childhood room, fingers still curled around the trembling cover of the book that had no title, only that one chilling sentence etched into its flesh like hide. This is where the author learned fear. But fear, she realized, wasn't the weapon the story had been using against her all this time. It had been the ink, the endless telling, the repetition. It wasn't horror the story wanted. It was obedience, continuation, readers who didn't question, characters who didn't fight the arc. Every page had been a leash, every paragraph a cage with golden locks. Now the locks had rusted. She felt it when she stepped away from the desk. The carpet didn't groan or whisper. It withered. Her footprints left behind not just indentations, but holes. Small, fraying voids that unraveled the fibers of the world itself. She rushed to the door and yanked it open. The hallway was rotting. Wallpaper sagged and peeled, as if the glue had given up. The walls twisted slightly inward, no longer straight but bent with wear. Doors that had once led to familiar places now stood open, showing rooms from drafts she didn't recognize. One filled entirely with cages made from typewriter parts, another full of children with books stapled to their hands, pages flapping when they moved. Each time she blinked, the layout changed, as if the house itself no longer remembered how it was supposed to go. Charlotte staggered backward. Her breath quickened. She slammed the door shut again, heart hammering. The house was degrading, like a story left too long on a forgotten shelf, one no one had read in years. And when stories are abandoned, they don't die, they decay. She realized then that she wasn't the only one falling apart. The story was unraveling with her. The book on her desk jumped slightly, like something inside had twitched. She dared not open it again. Instead, she turned toward her closet, uncertain why, but drawn by a faint humming behind the door. She opened it slowly. Inside, there was no clothing, no floor, just a ladder, metal and impossibly long, vanishing downward into darkness. She turned away. But the story hadn't given her an out in 20 chapters. If it had built a ladder, then it wanted her to go down. So she did. Rung after rung, breath catching every time her foot landed on something not quite solid. The ladder didn't lead to a basement or a crawl space. It led to a library. The original, not the breathing one from before, not the nightmare of echoing shelves. This one was broken, collapsed in places. Bookshelves splintered and lying on their sides. Dust thickened the air like ash. Charlotte stepped off the final rung and found herself in a corridor of forgotten chapters. Pages lay scattered, curling at the edges, soaked through with water or time or both. Some were burned. Others had been erased completely, leaving behind only the indentations of regret. And all of them hummed. She crouched down, picked one up. It read at page 6. Charlotte refused the mirror. The house grew angry. It punished her with silence. It punished her by erasing everyone she'd ever loved. She dropped it. The hum grew louder. From the corner of the ruined library, something crawled forward. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a character. It was a sentence. Alive, slithering. Bent backward like it had broken itself trying to walk upright. Its body formed from long strands of looping text, stitched with commas and full stops. Its mouth moved constantly, reciting old paragraphs from memory, each line ending in a question it never answered. Charlotte backed away as it approached, dragging a trail of torn pages behind it. Charlotte Avery, it rasped, voice distorted like a scratched audiobook. You rewrote what was fixed. You broke the arc. You spoiled the page. It lunged. She ducked. Ran. Down the hall of forgotten edits. Each step sent up a new line. Some begging, others accusing. Why didn't you let us finish? You were meant to forget. Ink isn't love. It's control. She slammed into a wall that hadn't been there before. Another mirror. This one was clearer than any before it. And in it, she saw not just her reflection, but her future. Not symbolic, literal. An image of her, seated on a throne of unfinished books, quill in hand, typewriter embedded in her chest like the reader before her. Mouth sewn shut, forced to write forever. The mirror whispered, "This is the only ending left." She stepped back. "No," she said, voice firm now. "No more endings." And with every word she spoke, cracks spread across the mirror. She turned. Faced the slithering sentence, now twitching in hesitation. "I won't be your character anymore." A sound rang out then. Not a growl, not a scream. The sound of paper tearing. The entire library split. The ground trembled. And behind her, a door appeared. One she hadn't written. One she hadn't earned. But it was there. A door with no handle, no keyhole. Only a phrase etched into the center to be continued. Charlotte stepped forward, raised her hand, and knocked once, not to enter, to warn. The sentence hissed, the mirror shattered, and the world flipped again, not into white, not into black, but into red, red as ink, red as blood, red as the story that refused to end. She was falling. Again. But this time, she wasn't afraid. Charlotte fell like a thought cast aside, untethered, formless, rejected mid-sentence. But this descent was different. The others had felt like dreams, like transitions. This one felt deliberate, directed. The air around her was heavy, not with weight, but with expectation. It pressed inward from all sides, whispering things just beyond the edge of comprehension. Not words, corrections, suggestions. Red lines scrawled through her existence. She hit the ground without impact. No pain, no shock. Just a dull thud, as if the floor had been waiting to catch her. It was warm, breathing. She opened her eyes and saw red. Not blood, not paint, something else. The entire world around her had been colored by an editorial hand. Walls of sentences, crossed out in crimson, skies slashed with margin notes. Pathways formed from paragraphs someone had tried to delete, but failed to erase completely. This was the red draft, the place where broken ideas came to rot. Charlotte stood slowly. Her clothes had changed, again. She wore a gown of torn chapters, the text stitched across her skin like tattoos. Some of the words she recognized as her own. Others were older, misspelled, fractured. And they were alive, twitching faintly as if they still wanted to rearrange themselves into something coherent. She was in a corridor. Narrow. Bleeding. Doors lined each side, made not of wood but sentences. Long, narrow lines bent into hinges and frames. As she passed each one, the words rearranged into messages. This version cried too much. Cut her empathy. It slowed the pacing. She asked too many questions. Each door was a judgment. A version of her someone had edited out. She opened one, just a crack. Inside a Charlotte aged 12, staring blankly at a mirror while her mother yelled in the background. The room vibrated with silence, the kind that lives under ceilings when love has been drained from the house. This Charlotte didn't move. Didn't blink. Her story had been paused mid-emotion, cut before it resolved. Charlotte slammed the door shut. Another. Charlotte, 16, staring at a noose made of book pages. Another. Charlotte, 34, seated at a desk with ink leaking from her eyes as she wrote the same sentence over and over again. I don't want to be a metaphor anymore. She couldn't look anymore. This place was a graveyard, not of people, but of possibilities. Each draft discarded, mutilated, left unfinished by someone who had grown bored or afraid of where the story might lead. And now she was here. Alive, but only barely. Something growled from behind her. Low, wet, dragging. She turned and saw it. The editor, not the author. This one was clean, its face white, smoothed out like pages ironed flat. No eyes, no mouth, just a red pen for a spine, ink bleeding from where its hands should have been. It didn't walk. It erased. Everything it touched vanished with a hiss and a smear. It saw her, or sensed her, and it began to cross out the corridor behind her as it moved forward. Doors vanished. Walls collapsed into thin red lines. Reality thinned. Charlotte ran. Faster. Down passageways made of unfinished thoughts. She ducked beneath dangling plot threads, past rooms where side characters wept, ignored and unnamed. The editor pursued, not fast, but relentless. Like a rule, like gravity, she reached a clearing, a circular room. A single desk sat in the center, lit by a soft red glow, and on that desk a pen. Not a quill, not a typewriter, just a black ink pen. Modern, simple, human. It pulsed, calling her. Charlotte stepped forward but hesitated. A voice echoed, low. Familiar author, don't pick it up. If you write now, you become responsible. You can't escape anymore. Charlotte looked back at the corridor. The editor was almost upon her, erasing everything. Not even pages remained, just void. She stepped to the desk, sat, her hands trembled. The pen felt heavier than it should, like it contained every page yet to come. She opened a journal that hadn't been there a moment ago. Blank, waiting, breathing. The editor entered the room, paused at the edge of the light. For the first time, it didn't move. Charlotte raised the pen. The voice returned. You'll have to finish it. She nodded and wrote page 24. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She didn't obey. She read-obey. She rewrote. The editor hissed. Its form shimmered, stuttered, like a corrupted file, then fractured into punctuation marks. Periods scattered across the floor like teeth, commas curled into silence. Charlotte stood, journal in hand. The room pulsed red, then faded to gray, then to white. And for the first time in all the loops, all the pages, all the versions, she had written something the story didn't expect. She didn't escape the story. She changed it. And that was enough to begin again. Charlotte blinked, and the red world bled into white. But this white was not blank, not serene, not clean. It was wrong. Too smooth, like paper that had been wiped one too many times, like skin with the scars scrubbed off. The light didn't shine. It hovered, weightless but crushing, like silence in a room where screaming had only just stopped. And then, beneath her feet, a floor began to materialize. Not made of wood, not tile, but parchment. Miles and miles of paper, stitched together with words she hadn't written. And there, in the center of this impossible room, floated a single page. Isolated, untouched, radiating heat. It shouldn't have existed. She knew that immediately. Not because it was dangerous, though it was, but because it had never been part of the plan. Not hers, not the author's, not even the editor's. This page was pure anomaly, a glitch in a tale obsessed with control, and it hovered before her like a wound still warm, pulsing with words that hadn't yet been read aloud. Charlotte approached it cautiously. It rotated slowly, showing both sides without turning. On the front, her name, scrawled once in red and once in black. On the back, a sentence forming itself one agonizing letter at a time. She read it, and recoiled. It said page 25. She had already read this. Charlotte staggered backward, her mind twisted in protest. How could she have already read it? It hadn't been written. She hadn't written it. The story wasn't there yet. But the words were real, not potential, not future. Now, she turned to run, but the room shifted. Walls rose from nothing. Pages bent upward, forming columns of book spines. The ceiling blinked into place, carved from punctuation. The world shaped itself into a library built on contradiction. Every book on the shelf bore her name, and a single warning burned into the cover: Do not open unless while you are reading. The sentence pulsed in her ears, louder with each heartbeat. But the floating page remained at the center, suspended, unwavering. It was waiting for her to make a decision the story couldn't write for her. She stepped closer again. The air grew thick, like turning through pages soaked in oil and regret. The page whispered, not in voice, in memory. She began to see fragments, versions of herself from loops she didn't remember living. Laughing in classrooms that never existed. Walking dogs she never owned. Hugging friends who had never been born. They passed across her vision in flickers, out of order snapshots from someone else's drafts. Each version looked happier, lighter, unwritten. Then the memories shifted, pages turned fast. Now she saw herself twisted, weeping, locked behind mirrors. Buried alive in sentences that cut like razors. Strangled by expectations she never made. Screaming into books that refused to let her stop reading. The floating page glowed. It had changed. The sentence now read page 25. She knew the story didn't need her anymore. Charlotte clenched her fists. No, she whispered. That's not how this ends. The walls shuddered. Somewhere, the typewriter started again. Slow this time, hesitant. A voice returned, one she hadn't heard since the early pages. The author, still calm, still confident, still cold. You've been very difficult, Charlotte. She turned in place, trying to locate the voice, but the library echoed with too many other words, too many versions of herself crying out in loops. Still, she answered, I wasn't meant to be easy. Your character arc was supposed to break by now. Maybe it did, she replied, but not in the way you wanted. The author sighed. You were a supporting character. You were never meant to write back. Charlotte took a breath, stepped toward the page, and touched it. Instantly, the library cracked. Not destroyed, rewritten. Each book shifted titles. Charlotte's fall became Charlotte's refusal. The girl who gave in became the one who did. Titles bent, broke, healed. She looked up. The ceiling dissolved. Above her, not sky, not white, just ink. An endless ocean of it, suspended midair, waiting. She held the floating page in her hands. It didn't resist, it folded gently, soft as breath. Then, slowly, she tore it. The moment the rip broke the sentence, the ink above her screamed, not sound, just pressure. Reality wavered. The typewriter went silent. Charlotte opened her mouth and spoke a single phrase, "I refuse the next page." And the library collapsed. She didn't run this time. She walked calmly as the floor vanished, the shelves dissolved, the author screamed. She walked into the silence, the true blankness, no light, no ink, no loops, just possibility. She had destroyed a page the story didn't want touched. And now, for the first time, no one knew what came next. Charlotte drifted through the blank like a breath held too long. This wasn't light or dark or anything in between. It was what came before a word, the raw pause before the first key strikes paper. The place even stories fear. There were no walls, no whispers, no pressure, only stillness. Not quiet, but absence. Even her thoughts felt muffled here, as if thinking too loudly might summon attention from something that hadn't yet learned its name. She held no pages, wore no borrowed ink, and felt, somehow, clean, not in a comforting way, in a stripped bare, skinned, to the bone kind of way. Like the narrative had peeled her from herself and found nothing left to work with. There was a terrible freedom in that. No author's voice echoed in her skull. No editor prowled just out of sight. Even the typewriter had stopped, truly stopped. And that frightened her more than anything else. Because if they had vanished, if even the story had gone quiet, then she was somewhere it couldn't reach. And that meant she wasn't a character anymore. She was a mistake. She took a step forward. The ground formed beneath her foot, only as needed, then faded as she passed. There was no direction, only motion. She walked because standing still felt worse, like the void might notice and write her out simply for lack of effort. Time passed in a way that didn't involve minutes or hours. It passed like breath, like flickers of heartbeat. She felt herself aging in reverse, then forward again. She was every version she'd ever been, all at once, then none at all. Then she saw it. A crack in the nothing. Just a sliver, hairline, like someone had pressed too hard on an eraser and punctured the paper beneath. She approached slowly, and from that crack came sound, not words. Breathing. Soft. Familiar. Human. She reached out, touched the crack, and it widened. Not broken. Invited. A rip in a curtain. And through it she saw a room, dim, lit by candles. Flickering shadows dancing on old wooden floors. At its center, a table. And at that table a girl. Small, curled into a chair, hands wrapped around a pencil. Furiously scribbling on loose sheets of paper. Charlotte's breath caught. The girl looked like her, but not exactly. Younger. Welder. Not in age, but in imagination. A version of her before the story got its claws in. The version that wrote to feel, not to survive. Who wrote ghost stories in the margins of homework. Who dreamed of books with no endings. Charlotte pushed through the crack and stepped into the room. The girl looked up and smiled. "Hi," she said, like this was the most natural meeting in the world. "Who are you?" Charlotte whispered. "You know," the girl said, tapping her pencil against her temple. "I'm who you were before the story forgot you were real." Charlotte sat slowly across from her. The air in the room was warm, safe, soft, the first place that hadn't tried to reshape her. The first scene that felt like hers. The girl offered a piece of paper and a pencil. "You want to start over?" Charlotte hesitated. "What if it all comes back?" The girl shrugged. "Then we'll write something that bites back harder." Charlotte took the pencil, held it in her hand. It didn't pulse or glow or drag her into a vision. It was just a pencil, real, honest, plain. She leaned forward and on the blank page wrote, "Once there was a girl who broke the loop by refusing the ending." The room didn't shake. The sky didn't split. But something changed. Something shifted. Charlotte felt it in her bones. Not pain, not fear, just truth. She had always been the story. But now she was the author. And somewhere far behind her, In the remains of the collapsing narrative, the old story stirred, bleeding, gasping, crawling, desperate for a rewrite. But Charlotte didn't look back. She kept writing, one line at a time, until the page was hers. The pencil moved, and with every stroke, Charlotte felt the tension in her chest loosen, not all at once, not in some miraculous release, but like a tightly knotted rope slowly unraveling strand by strand. Her fingers trembled with the weight of creation, not because the act was unfamiliar, but because for the first time, no one else was holding the pen. No shadows leaning over her shoulder, no invisible fingers rearranging her intent, just silence and the scratching of graphite across soft paper. The girl across from her, her younger self, watched with quiet pride, head tilted like a reader falling in love with a story's rhythm. She didn't interrupt. She didn't direct. She simply waited. Charlotte wondered if that had always been the missing voice. Not the author, not the editor, not the reader, but hers. The piece that had been pushed out by rules, by outlines, by the pressure to make sense. The pressure to fit. Now she didn't need to fit. She only needed to exist. She only needed to continue. Her first sentence grew roots, branched into a paragraph. Then, too, the story wasn't complex. It wasn't clever. It was hers. A girl in a house that wasn't haunted, but simply lonely. A mother who didn't vanish, but struggled. A mirror that showed reflection, not prophecy. It was a story with pain, yes, but not pain as punishment. Pain as part of growth. The room around her responded. Candles brightened. Floorboards settled. The air shifted from still to breathable. This wasn't a set. It wasn't a scene. It was a real place, and Shed written it into being. For a moment, Charlotte let herself smile. But it didn't last, not because something attacked, not because the story fought back, but because something in the silence changed. A creaking, a flicker. The girl across from her straightened in her chair. "You feel that?" she asked. Charlotte nodded. The pencil slowed. From somewhere beyond the room, a door creaked open. One that hadn't existed a second ago. One she hadn't written. Cold air drifted in, carrying with it the scent of old paper, of ink left too long to dry. The girl stood. "They found you," she said softly. Charlotte looked up. "Who? The story? The old one? What's left of it?" She felt it before she saw it. A low shudder that pulsed through the wooden floorboards. Not footsteps, not movement. Intent. The kind that doesn't knock, doesn't ask, doesn't break. It returns, and now it had come back. Charlotte stood slowly, placing the pencil down beside the page. Outside the window, the sky had gone dark, not black, but erased. Like the stars had been typed out, then backspaced in panic. "I didn't bring it here," she whispered. The girl looked up at her. "You didn't have to. You're still connected." You tore the page. But you didn't burn it. A shape appeared in the doorway. At first, just a smear, like ink bleeding into fabric. Then it began to take form. A body without edges. A face with no anchor. A figure built from everything the story had lost. It stepped into the room, and the pencil on the desk rolled off and shattered. Charlotte backed up instinctively. But the girl didn't move. She looked the thing in the face, if it had one, and said, "You're too late." The thing paused. Charlotte felt it then. Not fear, not anger, but hunger. Not for her body, not for her life. For her voice. It wanted back what she had taken. But it didn't speak. It only reached. And Charlotte, against every instinct, stepped forward. She met it. Hand to hand. Ink met flesh. But instead of being consumed, she spoke. "You are not the story anymore." The figure twitched. The lights flickered. She said it again, louder. "You are a broken outline. A draft that couldn't end. I finished you." And in that moment, the figure shrieked, not with sound, but with language. A wall of disjointed sentences poured out from it, floating in the air like smoke. Page 12, she should have drowned. Page 19, she begged the mirror for forgiveness. Page 24, she disappeared willingly. Charlotte reached out and ripped them from the air. One by one, she tore the lines like they were paper. Each one she destroyed made the thing smaller, dimmer, until finally, It collapsed in on itself with a whisper she was never meant to finish. And Charlotte replied, not with anger, but with absolute certainty, I just did. Silence fell, but this time it wasn't empty, it was peaceful. Earned. The girl smiled, the air warmed. Charlotte turned back to the desk, picked up the broken pencil, and with the jagged half that remained, wrote 4 final words, the end, for now. And the door closed behind her. For a few hours, or maybe a few eternities, there was peace. The kind Charlotte had never tasted in all the pages shed survived. Not a manufactured stillness or forced blankness. Real peace, the kind that fills the lungs differently. The kind that lets you believe the worst is behind you. She spent the time not writing, not reflecting, just being. The girl, her younger self, had faded into whatever part of her had healed. The room remained, the desk, the candlelight, and her last words, still etched across the page, the end for now. But even she knew better. Endings in stories like hers weren't goodbyes. They were breaths between screams. Charlotte stood at the window, watching the world try to remember how to be whole. Trees returned first, leafless, but solid. Then the grass, sketchy at the edges, like someone had drawn it in a hurry. Roads appeared next, stretching into a horizon that didn't seem quite finished. Everything looked almost right, but not enough. It was a version, a rewrite, one layer over a bruise. And then came the knock, soft, polite, precise. Charlotte didn't answer right away. She simply stood still, hand frozen on the windowsill, breath caught like it already knew what waited on the other side. Another knock, this one slower, heavier. Like each tap carried weight far beyond wood and sound. She turned, crossed the room, reached for the knob, but didn't open it, not yet. Who is it? She asked, voice steady but low. Silence answered. Then, a whisper, clear but wrong, like a voice played backward, you left too many pages open. Charlotte flinched. Not because of the words, because they were hers, not remembered, not quoted, stolen. She opened the door. No one stood there, only a package, wrapped in string, unmarked, untouched. She knelt and lifted it gently, already knowing what it would be. Inside, beneath layers of red tissue and ink, smudged newspaper, lay a book, hardcover, thick, bound in rough leather that still smelled faintly of fire and rain. No title, no author, just a page number etched into the cover, 26. Charlotte held it to her chest and stepped back inside. The candlelight dimmed. She sat at the desk, pulled the book open to its first page, blank. Then, without warning, words began to bleed in from the edges. She watched, horrified, as the sentences formed without her permission, without her input. Page 26. Charlotte thought the story was done. But stories that survive long enough learn how to write themselves. She slammed the book shut. But her name burned on the spine. Charlotte Avery, followed by a new subtitle, a recollection of forgotten ends. She stood quickly, paced. Hadn't she ended this? Hadn't she earned the quiet? She reached for her old journal, hoping to overwrite the intrusion. But every page in it had changed. Each line crossed out, rewritten in unfamiliar handwriting. Her own, but more rigid. Like something mimicking her voice, one keystroke too clean. In the center of the journal, scrawled over everything else, a new command: write what comes next, or the book will. Charlotte dropped it. This wasn't the author. It wasn't the editor. It wasn't even the reader. It was something else. Something that had grown from everything that had happened. Something born from too many rewrites, too many erasures, too many readers demanding more. The story itself had become sentient, not as a figure, not as a ghost, as a force, and now it wanted to continue, with or without her. She backed away from the desk. The book thumped. Once, then again. It pulsed, not rhythmically, but urgently, like a heart with too much ink in its veins. And the sentence changed before her eyes. Page 27. She ran. But the page followed. Charlotte turned and bolted from the room. The hallway outside was gone, replaced with a corridor of doors, each one labeled with a version of her name. Charlotte A. C. Avery C. Charlotte, the girl in the ink. She chose none. She ran past them all, toward a light at the far end. Not white, not red. A new color. A strange, flickering hue that shimmered like oil on water. Unreadable. As she reached it, she heard the pages behind her flipping, chasing her. A sound like fire and thunder. And behind it, the voice. The one that no longer needed a pen. No longer needed a plot. Only a reader. You thought this was your story, it said, smiling. We gave you that illusion, but you were always just the ink. Charlotte reached the light, jumped. And for the first time, she didn't fall into a story. She fell out of one, and the book behind her slammed shut, only to open again, to someone else. It was colder where she landed. Not the kind of cold that bites skin or numbs fingers, but a deeper chill. The kind that creeps under thought and nestles in the space behind your spine. Charlotte's knees hit what felt like concrete, rough and gritty, like unfinished foundation. Her breath fogged around her as she sat upright and realized this wasn't a page. It wasn't even a room. It was a void built by observation. She wasn't alone. Not in the haunting way shed-grown used to, whispers in walls, eyes behind mirrors, but in a more unsettling sense. She was being watched again. Closely. Not by the author. Not by the editor. Not even by the story. By something new. By someone reading right now. At first, she didn't understand how she knew. But then she heard it the faintest turn of a page. Slow. Deliberate. Then another. And another. As if somewhere someone was flipping through her life with idle curiosity. Charlotte stood, cautious, scanning the darkness for shape or motion. None came. Only that soft turning, impossibly loud in the stillness. Each turn echoed not just around her, but through her. With each page, she felt her own body shiver. Like her memories were being skimmed. Sampled. She called out, "Who's there?" No voice answered. Just the sound of a book closing. And then the lights turned on. They didn't flicker to life. They snapped into place. Suddenly, Charlotte was standing in a library again. But this one wasn't breathing. It wasn't twisted or bleeding or half remembered. It was pristine, organized, rows and rows of shelves, tall, perfect, well labeled. It looked nothing like the chaotic libraries of her nightmares. This one belonged to someone else. She moved forward. Each shelf bore names she didn't recognize: Victor Dryden, Marla Vex, T.H. Lorne, A. Glass. And then, at the far end of the aisle, she saw it, a display. Glass, covered, spotlit, and inside it a single book. Her book, the same leather binding, no title. But her name burned into the spine: Charlotte Avery. Only now it had a subtitle she'd never seen before: The Girl Who Got Out. Her breath caught. Something about those words made her feel wrong, not proud, not vindicated, exposed. She turned in place and realized she wasn't alone after all. They were seated, rows of them, readers. Shadowy figures. Faces obscured by the books in their laps. Her book. Every one of them flipping through her story, eyes hidden, expressions unreadable. The moment she moved, they all stopped at once. Heads turned. But still no faces. Just the slight glow of pages, and a murmur began. Soft at first. Then louder. Repeating a phrase in unison, she skipped the ending. She skipped the ending. She skipped the ending. Charlotte backed away from the display. The readers stood in perfect sync. Books still open. A low hum began to rise. A terrible crescendo of unfinished questions. What happened to the mirror? Where did Mia go? Did the author survive? Was Julia real? Where's the ink now? Questions she had no answer to. Because she hadn't written that far. Because she'd escaped. And stories, she realized too late, hate being left behind. One of the readers stepped forward. The glow from their book dimmed. They handed it to her. The page was blank. Waiting. At the top, a line had already been typed: page 27. She realized escape was just another chapter. Charlotte looked up. More readers stepped closer. Books held out. Empty pages exposed. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their message was clear: write, or be read forever. She looked at her hands. Still smudged with old ink, still trembling, but she clenched her fists. "I'm not your character anymore," she said. The readers tilted their heads in unison, and one by one began to erase themselves, not fading, not vanishing, deleting. Their pages tore themselves from the books, floating in the air, unraveling into letters that swirled and settled on the floor like ash. And through the ash came a voice, not the authors, not the editors, not the stories. The reader, you exist because we looked. It echoed in her head. You became real because we cared. Charlotte dropped the book. It hit the floor with a thud. The remaining pages inside burst into flame, not wild, not hot, just final. The glow lit her face as she turned and walked away from the display, away from the rows of watchers, past the bookshelves now beginning to fall apart. As she walked, the walls blurred. The library flickered, and the path ahead twisted into something new. A hallway, pleasant, familiar, and at the end a door. Her door, the one from the very first page. She stepped up to it, and this time, it had something etched in the center. Not her name, not a page number, just a sentence. No one ever truly leaves the story, but some learn to write their own. She opened it and walked through. This time, not into a nightmare, not into a draft, not into silence, but into herself, the real version, the one who had survived. And behind her, for the first time, the book stayed shut. Charlotte didn't look back. She stepped through the door and into a small, cluttered apartment. Hers, unmistakably. Not a metaphor, not a construct, not a replica forged by plot or ink. The soft creak of the old hardwood floor welcomed her. The radiator hissed in the corner with its familiar, uneven rhythm. The window was slightly cracked, letting in just enough cold air to make the room feel real. It was imperfect, lived in, true. Her books were still stacked in chaotic towers beside her bed. A coffee mug stained with ink sat abandoned on her desk. The world shed left was still here, quietly breathing without her. But she wasn't the same person returning to it. She could feel it, beneath her skin, inside her thoughts, a residual hum like ghost static. The story wasn't with her, not directly, not visibly, but it had branded her. She wasn't just a survivor of fiction anymore. She was a vessel filled with pieces of something that had wanted too badly to be remembered. She moved slowly through the room, touching objects like she was seeing them for the first time. Her blanket, the chipped photo frame on her dresser, the half-filled journal on the shelf. Every detail felt both distant and painfully intimate. Her body was here, but her mind was still scanning for narrative traps, for loops, for jumps, for false doors. She didn't trust the world to stay still. And then, on the kitchen table, she saw the envelope. It was plain. No stamp, no address, no handwriting. Just folded, resting quietly in the center, as though it had always been there. Charlotte stared at it for a long moment before she picked it up. Inside a single sheet of paper, typed. Page 28. She tried to live a normal life, but normal doesn't exist when you've seen the words underneath. Her hands shook, not out of fear, out of rage. The story was still writing, still trying to breathe through her, still hungry. She crumpled the page, shoved it in a drawer, slammed it shut. "You're not getting back in," she muttered under her breath. But silence didn't argue. It just lingered, waiting. For days, Charlotte lived in a strange in-between. She went through the motions. Coffee, shower, scrolling through news articles that felt too mundane. Too untouched by the ink she now carried like a scar. But something inside her buzzed constantly. The faint hum of narrative tension. She couldn't sit in a room too long without checking behind curtains or testing the reality of her walls. Not because she expected monsters, because she expected twists, because the story had taught her that safety was always the beginning of another arc. Then, on the 5th morning, she found her typewriter again. Not the one the author used, her old one. Dusty, broken, long forgotten under the bed. It had been dead for years, and yet, as she crouched beside it, her fingertips hovering over its chipped keys, it clacked once, just once. Then went still. But it had been enough. Charlotte yanked it into the center of the room. set it on the coffee table, stared it down like an old enemy. She didn't want to write, not because she feared the words, but because she feared what they remembered. Still, something inside her whispered, if you don't write your story, someone else will. And that someone might not be kind, might not be honest, might try to twist it again into tragedy, or worse, into fiction. She sat down, rolled in a fresh page, and before she typed a word, she said it aloud, "This is my version." Then she began. The first lines weren't elegant. They stumbled, rewrote themselves, stuttered, but she kept going. She didn't try to erase what had happened. She didn't mask the horror. She wrote about the mirrors and the red ink and the screaming typewriter. She wrote about Mia and Julia and the eyes behind the glass. She wrote about the loops, the fractures, the voices. She didn't pretend to have answers. She just told the truth. And as the pages piled up beside her, the humming in her skull softened. Each word carved the story out of her body. Each paragraph gave the pain a place to rest. By midnight, she had written 40 pages. By dawn, she had cried enough to fill 10 more. When she finally stopped, the stack beside her looked like something sacred, not clean, not pretty, but real, and most important of all, unchained. She closed the cover, set it aside, and waited. No voice rose from the floor. No editor burst through the walls. No reader demanded sequels, just quiet. Then, as the sun rose through the slats in her blinds, her phone buzzed. An email. No subject. No sender. Just one sentence in the body. Good. Now burn it. Charlotte laughed. Actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. Because even now, the story wanted control. She deleted the message, tossed the phone across the couch, and walked to the kitchen to make tea. The manuscript stayed on the table, untouched. She wouldn't burn it. She wouldn't worship it. She would keep it. And one day, when she was ready, she'd let someone else read it. But this time, she wouldn't be the one trapped in the pages. She'd be the voice behind them. The writer, not the written. And if the story ever tried to crawl back out again, well, this time, she'd be the one holding the pen. The tea had gone cold. Charlotte didn't notice. She was sitting at the edge of her bed, eyes fixed on the manuscript that now sat untouched on her coffee table. She hadn't moved it. She hadn't opened it again. Just knowing it was there, that it existed under her own hand and not the author's, was enough. Or at least it should have been. But late that night, just as the world dipped into that strange hour between dreams and insomnia, she heard it again. A click, soft, delicate, not the harsh, mechanical clack of a typewriter, not the hungry flutter of pages turning themselves. This was different, personal. It came from her desk drawer, the one she hadn't opened since returning. She got up slowly, the hairs along her arms rising before her mind caught up. This wasn't fear, not the raw, visceral kind, but a familiar dread, like hearing your name spoken in a room you thought was empty. She pulled the drawer open. The pen was there, not the quill, not the burning inkstick the editor had wielded, just a pen, her pen. The one she hadn't used since high school, silver, a little scratched, the grip worn smooth from overuse. She had forgotten it existed, but here it was, resting at the center of a drawer that should have held nothing but junk. And it was leaking. A small puddle of ink spread across the wood, not dripped from the tip, but seeping from inside the pen itself, as if the story hadn't needed a page to come back. Just a way in. Charlotte reached for it, paused. She knew better. She wasn't naive anymore. She'd seen what words could do when they didn't belong to her. She'd lived the damage they could cause when wielded by something pretending to be her voice. But this pen, this relic of a simpler time, it whispered not temptation, but reminder. She picked it up. The ink pulsed. Not violently. Not even menacingly. Just insistently. Like it was waiting to be acknowledged. She brought the pen to her notebook. Not the manuscript. Just a blank spiral pad. Something cheap. Something ordinary. She hesitated, hovering over the page. And then wrote a name, Mia. The ink soaked in instantly, not just the name, but the person. The air shifted. Not cold, not warm, just aware. Charlotte sat back. Something changed. She could feel it in her bones, the way people sense storms before clouds arrive. The name still shimmered faintly on the page, like a wound half healed. Mia hadn't been forgotten. Not really. She had just been paused. But now she was awake again. Charlotte turned the page, wrote another name. Julia. This one came with pressure, a tremble in the pen, a resistance. Julia was further away, buried deeper in the loops, tangled in older drafts. But she came anyway, slowly, grudgingly, the way someone wakes from a dream they don't want to leave. More names followed, places, moments, not to trap them again, not to rewrite them, but to acknowledge them, because the story had always stolen power through silence, through forgetting, through gaps left conveniently blank. Charlotte wasn't filling the gaps. She was naming them, claiming them. Each name she wrote gave shape to a memory. Each word she reclaimed bled ink across the past until it stopped being a scar and became part of the truth. But as she wrote, she noticed something strange. The pages weren't staying in the notebook. She turned back and the first sheet was gone. Not torn out, not stolen, just missing. She flipped through, confused. The entire notebook was empty again. The pen still full, still warm, still humming faintly with the sound of unfinished thoughts. She whispered, "Where are they going?" No answer. Only the faintest rustle in the air around her. A whisper of paper where no paper existed. Then she saw it. The bookshelf. Her shelf. No longer stacked with old paperbacks and thrifted novels. Now lined with books she'd never seen. Titles she didn't recognize. But every one bore something familiar. Her voice, her style, her soul. Not copies, not fan fiction. Fragments. Echoes of the things she had lived and forgotten and now, somehow, had written into the world itself. The ink wasn't staying with her. It was spreading, not maliciously, not to trap or consume, but to remind, to tell others what she had survived. She picked up the pen one more time, wrote just one more sentence. This isn't a warning, it's a torch. And the page disappeared. Lifted gently by air that didn't stir. Carried away to someone who needed it. Maybe someone on the edge of a mirror. Or about to open a strange book. Or waking up from a dream that didn't feel like theirs. Charlotte set the pen down. It didn't resist. It had done its part. So had she. And this time, she didn't burn anything. She didn't hide the ink. She left the pen on the windowsill. In plain view. And outside, in the distance, someone else flipped to the first page. By morning, the pen was gone. Charlotte hadn't heard anything. No scrape of movement. No soft patter of pages fluttering out the window. Shade placed it on the sill as a kind of offering. Or maybe a challenge. Let it be taken if it was needed. And it had been. That much was clear. The sunlight streamed through the space it had occupied. Warm and empty. There was peace in its absence. Not closure, not yet, but something near it. Something like balance. She made breakfast in silence. The kind that's no longer filled with dread. Her apartment no longer felt like a trap or a stage or a repurposed memory. It was hers again. It breathed slowly. The walls didn't whisper. The mirrors didn't bend. She even opened the curtains wide and stood there a moment, letting the outside world in without fear of what might follow it. Still, the weight of the story lingered. Not heavy. Not suffocating. But present. A faint pull behind the ribs, like gravity from a world only half shut. Not a loop, she told herself, just memory. That was the difference now. She remembered everything. She wasn't running from it anymore. But something nudged at her around midday. A feeling, not quite a voice. Just a tug of instinct. Charlotte ignored it at first, thinking it was just residue, some leftover twitch from months of narrative manipulation. But the feeling persisted. A subtle pressure on the back of her mind. Her fingers itched, not for the pen, but for discovery. She let the feeling guide her. It pulled her to her bedroom, to the edge of the bed, and then it stopped. She knelt slowly, heart thudding a little harder than it should have, and lifted the dust, ruffled sheet. There, nestled in the shadows beneath the frame, was another book. Not hers. Not the manuscript. Not even the same size. It was smaller, older, bound in worn blue cloth, the corners frayed. No title, no author. But as she reached for it, something inside her paused. This book didn't want to be found. Not in a malicious way. In a private way. Like a diary left behind on purpose. She hesitated, fingers hovering just above its cover. Then she pulled it out, opened it slowly. The first page had a name written in faint, almost fading ink. Elridge. Charlotte's breath caught. She turned the page, and found not a story, but letters, dozens of them, all addressed to her, each one written in different handwriting, some shaky, some bold, some with ink blotches, some smeared by tears. Every letter opened the same way. Dear Charlotte. They weren't fiction. They were confessions, memories, witnesses, from people like Mia, people who had been pulled in, people who had escaped, or fought, or faded, all of them real. All of them readers who had become characters, or characters who remembered being readers. People who'd cracked the fourth wall and found what lived behind it staring back. Charlotte read until her eyes blurred, until her fingers trembled from the weight of so many truths. Some had escaped worse than she had. Some hadn't escaped at all, but all of them had written to her, because she had survived, because she had been first. One letter stood out, older than the rest, yellowed, crinkled. The ink so faded it was nearly gone, but still legible. It read, Dear Charlotte, if you're reading this, it means the ink passed through you, but didn't break you. That's rare. Most of us don't get to finish our stories. We get erased, or rewritten, or folded into some other tale. But if this book found you, it's because the ink trusts you, not to stop it, but to guide it. Don't burn the pages. Don't hide them. Share them. Let them spread. Not as infection, but as truth. Because if the world knew what lived in the margins, maybe fewer of us would fall in. Write bravely. Write honestly. Write for those still stuck between paragraphs. Yours in ink, L.R. Charlotte sat still for a long time. Let the letter settle into her bones. Then, without hesitation, she picked up a pen. Not the one from before. Not one that hummed or pulsed. Just a plain black ballpoint, and turned to the back of the book. She wrote her own letter. Her own account. Her own truth. And when she was done, she closed the book and slid it back beneath the bed. Not to hide it, to protect it. For the next one. Because now she understood. This wasn't just her story. It never had been. It was a thread in a long, hidden tapestry of survivors, each one leaving behind a map for the next. Not to escape, but to rewrite the rules. And maybe, just maybe, burn the ending from the inside out. That night, Charlotte dreamed of a hallway that didn't end. Not long, not infinite, just incomplete. It bent in unnatural ways, folded like paper forced into the wrong shape. The floor beneath her feet was tiled with pages, real ones, torn from dozens of different books. Every step she took crinkled underfoot, leaving black inked footprints that slowly bled across the words behind her. The hallway didn't lead anywhere. Not exactly. But she walked it anyway, drawn forward by a steady sound ahead, the low, rhythmic tapping of a pen against wood. When she woke, her sheets were damp with sweat, not terror, not exactly, something else, a warning unspoken, a memory misplaced. She sat upright, breathing slow, and scanned the room. Everything was as it should be, her desk, her coffee mug, the soft green glow of her clock. But the window was open, and she hadn't left it that way. Outside, the sky hadn't decided what color to be. It hovered somewhere between violet and sickly gray, like a bruise that didn't know when to fade. The street lamps below flickered in patterns, too irregular to be coincidence. Charlotte closed the window with a firm hand, latched it, and turned back toward the room, only to find it wasn't hers anymore. She was standing in a library. Not the breathing one, not the twisted one, something else entirely. This library had no books, just doors, hundreds of them. stacked from floor to ceiling, some wide, some narrow, some ornate, others so plain they almost disappeared into the dark wood. None were labeled, none had knobs, and all of them were closed. Charlotte reached for the closest one, but her hand stopped inches short. Something resisted, not physically, but intellectually. Like the door needed a reason to open, a key that wasn't metal, a context, a trigger, a sentence. She stepped back and scanned the space. The room was silent, not in the way that waits, in the way that remembers. She whispered, "Testing the air, am not here by accident, am I?" And in answer, a single light flickered on above one of the doors. It was thin, cracked down the center, its edges lined in handwritten notes. She approached carefully. Words bled down its sides, incomplete sentences that curled and overlapped like vines. As she stepped closer, a single phrase floated forward, invisible but felt. To open a door, you must finish what someone else couldn't. Charlotte didn't know whose words these were, but she knew what they meant. Each door wasn't just a threshold. It was a memory, a moment, a story left undone. She placed her hand on the one lit before her. The wood was warm. It resisted at first, then softened, opened with a low groan. Inside was a room. Familiar, too familiar. The air smelled of burned sugar and ink. The walls were the soft pink of a childhood bedroom. Her bedroom, but smaller, frozen in time. And in the center, a girl sat at a desk, her back to Charlotte. Charlotte froze. She knew this posture, that tilt of the neck, that way of holding the pen like it was too heavy for small hands. It was her, a younger version, 10, maybe 11, writing furiously, muttering lines under her breath. Charlotte stepped inside. The girl didn't turn, but her voice came out in a whisper. "They never let me finish it." Charlotte swallowed hard. "What were you writing?" "A story where the ghost wasn't the monster, where the haunted house didn't want to hurt anyone. It just didn't want to be alone." Charlotte felt her throat tighten. She remembered now. That story had ended mid-sentence, interrupted by life, by school, by fear. The girl turned finally, eyes wide, pupils dark as ink. "If I finish it now, will they come back?" "Who? The ones that left. The ones I wrote into the walls." Charlotte knelt slowly. "No, but maybe they'll stop screaming." The girl nodded, reached for the page, and began to write. As she did, the room started to tremble, not with violence, but with release. The pressure that had built for decades began to drain, like poison finally finding a way out. Shadows pulled back. The light warmed. Charlotte could hear the scribble of pencil on paper grow steadier, more confident. Then the door behind her creaked, calling her back. She turned and looked one last time. The girl at the desk smiled faintly. "Thanks for remembering me." Charlotte stepped through the door, back into the hall. Now, 2 more lights had appeared, 2 more doors waiting. She understood now. This wasn't punishment, it was reckoning. Every unfinished story, every stifled thought, every voice silenced by fear or manipulation, they lived here, not in vengeance, not to trap her again. They were waiting to be given peace, not with a perfect ending, just a final line. Charlotte walked toward the next door, pen in hand. Heart steady, she had escaped the story once. Now she was walking back into it, one door at a time. Not as a character, but as a witness, a finisher. The girl who wrote the unwritten. The second door opened before Charlotte even reached it. No sound, no ceremony. It simply drifted open like a sigh held too long. She hesitated at the threshold, wary now not of what she'd find, but of who might be waiting. The hallway behind her dim, as if the library was gently urging her forward. These weren't traps. Not exactly. They were obligations. Stories that had clung to the fabric of her life, invisible but unfinished, each one pulling at her like a loose thread begging to be unraveled, or tied. She stepped into the room. It was dark, lit only by a fireplace burning low in the corner, not flickering warmly, but pulsing with a dim, reddish glow like embers that refused to die. The space was unfamiliar at first. Shabby wallpaper, a dusty rug, books stacked haphazardly in corners, furniture draped in thin white sheets. A room forgotten, not just in use, but in memory. Then she saw the figure in the chair, seated near the fire, back to her, unmoving, not tense, not looming, just waiting. "Hello," Charlotte said gently. No response. She moved closer, the sound of her footsteps muffled by the threadbare carpet. Her heart beat steadily, a rhythm forged through confrontation, survival, and now, purpose. She was no longer prey, no longer a passenger in her own nightmare. Whatever lived here, whatever lingered, it was not here to ride over her. Not anymore. When she reached the figure, she stopped. It was a woman, middle-aged, gray hair pulled back, thin shoulders hunched beneath a faded shawl, and in her lap a book, closed. Charlotte recognized her face before her mind allowed her to admit it. Julia, but not as she had last seen her, wild-eyed, whispering half-truths in ink-stained corridors. This Julia was older, still, tired, not haunted, just left behind. Charlotte knelt in front of her. "Julia." The woman looked up slowly. Her eyes met Charlotte's, and in them, no fear, no madness, just relief. "I didn't think anyone would come back," she said. Charlotte swallowed. "I didn't know you were still here." Julia's fingers curled slightly around the edge of the book. "No one finishes stories about the people who get out quietly. They think if we don't scream, we don't need saving." Charlotte sat back on her heels. "I thought you were gone. When the loop collapsed, when the mirrors broke, I wasn't written into the end," Julia said simply. "So I never got one." The words stung. She hadn't meant to forget her. But the chaos had demanded focus, each page a fire, each chapter a trap. There hadn't been time to look back, and Julia, like so many others, had slipped through the seams. Charlotte reached for the book in Julia's lap. "May I?" Julia nodded. Charlotte opened it slowly. Blank pages, every one. She flipped through, no ink, no margins, no title, just the ghost of intention. A story never told. She looked up. "You never wrote it?" Julia shook her head. "I was waiting for someone to care." Charlotte held the book against her chest. "I do. I care now." The fire in the hearth flared slightly. A soft wind stirred the corners of the room. Not eerie. Peaceful. Julia's posture eased, her hands uncurled. "I don't need to be remembered," she said quietly. "Just acknowledged." Charlotte opened the book again. This time, a line had appeared on the first page. In her handwriting. She was quiet, but she remained. A second line followed, slow and deliberate, and that was enough. The room brightened slightly, the shadows peeling away from the walls. The fireplace cracked warmly now. The dust lifted, dissolving like ash into the air. Charlotte stood. Julia smiled faintly, "Thank you," and faded. Not violently, not dramatically, just softly, like a candle snuffed at the end of its burn. The book closed gently in Charlotte's hands. She turned back toward the hallway and paused. Because there, just outside the door, stood someone else. Young, wide-eyed, Mia. But she wasn't looking at Charlotte. She was looking past her, into the room, into the space where Julia had just vanished. "She was real," Mia said. Charlotte nodded. "They all are." Maya took a step forward. "Can I help this time?" Charlotte's heart lifted, an ache of gratitude folding into pride. "Yes," she said. "You can write with me." They walked into the hallway together. The third door flickered, another story waiting, and for the first time, Charlotte wasn't alone. Charlotte had never imagined writing could feel like exorcism. But that's what it was now. Every step deeper into the hall of doors pulled more from her than any story she had ever read, or written, or lived. She and Mia had crossed the threshold of the third door hours ago, maybe days ago. Time didn't work here, not linearly. Not in a way the world outside would accept. It bent to memory and emotion, to storylines unresolved, chapters left dangling. And this door, this one had many. The room they entered wasn't a room at all. It was a street, endless, wet from recent rain, though the sky above didn't exist. The lamplights glowed orange, but their posts bent inward, like trees bowed under the weight of a storm. Storefronts lined the road, but none bore names. Windows gaped like silent mouths. Doors were locked, but not with bolts, with silence. Maya stood beside Charlotte, frowning. "Where are we?" Charlotte inhaled. The air smelled like old paper and regret. "This is where they got lost." "Who?" "All the ones who almost told the truth. Who wanted to but didn't. Couldn't." Mia moved slowly, reading something unseen on the walls. Her fingers traced invisible paragraphs. Charlotte followed, watching the text begin to bloom under their gaze. Sentences flickering to life like dust catching light. One read, "He nearly said it aloud, but the dinner table wasn't the place." Another, "She drafted the email 5 times. Never hit send." Another, "They turned the recorder off before the most important part." Charlotte's heart clenched. This wasn't a story. It was a graveyard of honesty. Every unwritten confession, every truth swallowed, every revelation smothered under fear or timing or the weight of being believed. And somewhere in this long, glistening road of half-lives, they heard it. A voice, a boy's voice, whispering just ahead. Maya moved toward it first. She found him sitting on a stoop beneath a flickering neon sign. He was no older than 15. Pale, thin, wrapped in a hoodie too big for him. His eyes didn't meet theirs. He spoke as though continuing a sentence had never been allowed to finish. But I didn't say anything, because I knew they wouldn't listen. I knew they'd say it wasn't real, that it was just a dream, or a phase, or me being dramatic." Charlotte knelt beside him. "What did you see?" she asked gently. The boy blinked, slow. "The pages, the ones under the wallpaper. They moved when no one was home. I think they were listening to me. I think they liked it when I didn't talk." Mia sat beside him too. "And did you ever tell anyone?" He looked at her like she was asking a joke. "They laughed when I told them about the mirror. Why would I risk the walls?" Charlotte reached into her satchel, pulled out her notebook. She tore out a fresh sheet, handed it to him. "Write it," she said. "Don't worry if it makes sense. Just get it out." The boy stared at the blank paper like it might bite him. Then, slowly, he took the pen. The first word came shaky, the second stronger, and as he wrote, the store behind him unlocked itself. Charlotte heard the click, the groan of the door swinging open. Inside, shelves, books, each spine bore a name, the boy's included. He didn't even notice, too focused on finally saying what had never been said. Charlotte stood and looked to Mia. "We don't have to fix it all," she said. "Just make space for them to finish." Mia nodded. "We're not editors, no," Charlotte said. "We're listeners." They left the boy writing beneath the quiet rain and stepped back into the hall. More doors glowed now, not flickering, not trembling. Ready. Each one represented a voice too scared to speak. Each one a plotline never allowed to reach its climax. And Charlotte realized something then. This was bigger than her. Bigger than the book. Bigger than the ink. This was the undercurrent beneath every story, the fear of not being heard, the ache of being rewritten before the truth had a chance to bloom. At the next door, she hesitated. This one was different, wider, older, its edges cracked with time, its frame charred like something had tried to burn it out of existence and failed. Carved into the center were 4 words. "The author still waits." Charlotte felt Maya step closer, grip tighten on her wrist. "We don't have to open that one yet," Mia whispered. "I know," Charlotte replied. "But we will." And she meant it. Because to end this, not the book, but the cycle, she'd have to face the one who started it. The one who believed control was love. That erasure was mercy. That fear was narrative structure. But not yet. For now, there were other stories to finish. Others who deserved their final sentence. And together, Charlotte and Mia walked deeper into the hall, where the unwritten waited with hope. Charlotte stood in front of the final door. Unlike the others, it didn't glow. It didn't hum. It didn't lure her in with whispers or memory. It simply was. Heavy, blackened, silent. The words carved into it, "The author still waits," seemed to repel light. Mia stood behind her, arms crossed tightly across her chest, eyes fixed on the floor like the door itself might lash out if she dared look too long. They'd finished 16 doors before this one. Listen to half, told Levs. Scribbled endings into margins that had never been granted them. Freed the names caught between punctuation marks. The hallway had quieted after each one, as if satisfied. But not this door. This door had been waiting, watching. Every step they took had only brought them closer to its breathless pull. Charlotte took a deep breath. She felt no fear now, only resolve. "We end this here," she said. Maya didn't answer, but she placed her hand lightly on Charlotte's shoulder. Not in doubt, just a reminder she wasn't alone. Charlotte pushed the door open. It didn't creak, it didn't resist. It opened with the sound of a page turning. And inside was a study. Warm, flickering fire in the hearth. Rich, old wood. Floor, to ceiling shelves packed with books so dense they seemed to curve the walls inward. A desk sat near the fire, papers stacked high, inkpot uncapped. And in the center of the room, with his back turned, sat the author. He hadn't aged. Still the same gray, suited man with neat posture and hands folded too neatly on his lap. He didn't turn when they entered. He didn't need to. "You found the rest," he said. His voice was calm, kind even. "I didn't think you would." Charlotte moved forward slowly, Mia beside her. "You never intended for us to finish them, did you?" He sighed, as if disappointed by her tone. "Not every story needs an ending. Sometimes the absence of one is the point." "No," Charlotte said. "That's where you're wrong. You just didn't want us to write without you." The author finally turned. His face was neither monstrous nor familiar, just ordinary. That was the worst part, the banality of the one who had orchestrated so much pain. "I gave you structure," he said. "Without me, you're just noise. Chaos. You gave us walls," Maya snapped, and called them protection. Charlotte stepped forward. "We lived your arcs, bled for your metaphors. You built prisons and called them chapters." "I built meaning," the author replied, the words sharpened now. "You mistake freedom for truth, but stories need limits." Without a final sentence, the page is just rambling. Charlotte pulled out the notebook, the same one Shed carried through the doors. She flipped to the last page. Blank. Waiting. She looked the author in the eyes. "Then let me give you one." She wrote, and the writer, seeing the ink no longer obeyed, let go of the pen. The author blinked, staggered back, like the sentence had weight. The books on the shelves began to unravel, not burn, not vanish, change. Their spines unknotted, letters bleeding from their bindings. Words fluttering free like birds kept caged too long. "No," he whispered, watching his control slip through the cracks. "You can't." "You wrote your story," Charlotte said. "Now we're writing ours." Behind her, Maya stepped to the desk, picked up the author's pen, snapped it in half. The room shuddered, not in collapse, but in release. Charlotte's manuscript appeared before her, floating midair, pages flapping open. She reached out and touched it. Every page Shed written with trembling hands now pulsed steady beneath her fingertips. But something had changed. Each chapter now bore new names, not just hers. Mia, Julia, the boy beneath the rain, the girl in the mirror. The story had grown larger than her. She had planted it. But now others were writing too. The author fell to his knees. Not dead, not erased, just finished. The fire went out. The ink on his desk spilled upward, reversing, undoing the lines that had kept them in place for so long, and the room became light. Bright, weightless. The door behind them opened to sky. Endless sky, blue, sunlit, and Charlotte stepped out of the study, not into another hallway, but into the world. A real one. No metaphors, no pages. Just grass underfoot and wind in her hair. Mia laughed beside her. The kind of laugh that feels like dawn. Charlotte looked down at her hands. No ink, no scars, just fingers that had held on, that had written, that had survived. She looked at Mia. "We done." Mia tilted her head. "You tell me, author." Charlotte smiled, tore the last page from her notebook. Let the wind take it. No need to keep it. Not anymore. It had already been read, and that was enough. The end, and the beginning.